A very good morning indeed to you. It's 4 minutes after 10 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The Tory Manifesto announcement comes today. The Liberal Democrats came yesterday. We'll certainly be catching up with what is in it later with Natasha. We may dedicate the next hour of the programme to one of the things that came out in yesterday's Liberal Democrat promises, pledges, proposals, policies, whatever you want to call them. I'm particularly drawn to the idea of cannabis shops opening up on British high streets. And it occurs to me, not for the first time, that we haven't really kept a proper eye on what's happened in other territories where that has already been done. But we begin by looking at other territories. Do you know, one of the most gratifying moments I've had in this studio was in the aftermath of the 2016 referendum, when I thought, somewhat perhaps ambitiously, I genuinely wondered whether we could do a show, and I'm used, as you know, you're used to it as well, to having a switchboard that groans under the weight of people hoping to contribute to the programme. Not every day. Some days you're looking for very specific responses to a very specific question. But generally speaking, there's a sort of warm glow of security and comfort that overcomes a radio phone-in presenter when he is spoilt for choice on people phoning into the radio. And I wondered whether we could actually fill up a switchboard with people who weren't in this country. I wanted to find out what we looked like, particularly in the context of Brexit, to people listening elsewhere. And I was so amazed by the response, I even took a photograph of it. I think I perhaps posted it. And ever since then, I've been aware of the privilege of talking every day to people who are way beyond the environs of these islands. Although we talk chiefly about domestic politics, some people, of course, have an interest in the broader sweep of politics beyond their own country. Some people are expats, or immigrants, as we'd call them if the movement had been in the other direction. Some people are living overseas and keen to keep in touch. Quite a lot of listeners in Australia, would you believe, who probably fall into both categories. And then, dare I say it, there might be some people who just enjoy our company every day and find it preferable to whatever is on offer in their home countries. And it is to you that I speak today. It is to the people of continental Europe, as I suppose we call it now, or the EU, which doesn't quite cover exactly the same territory, that we turn our attention this morning. And there are two reasons for it. The first is that the results in various elections in 27 EU states have been interesting. They're not quite as seismic as some people either suspected or indeed have reported. The centre has held, but there are, if there's not an actual eruption, there are certainly shockwaves in place as voters supported parties that are, I think, reasonably described as far right. And that's the thing that stopped me first. You know, the memories of the D-Day commemorations are still fresh in our memories and were still fresh in the memories of people, particularly in France and Germany, who made their way into the ballot box and cast votes for parties that are closer to the closer to the far-right history of continental Europe than the other alternatives on that paper. And it's an unhelpful phrase in some ways, because the umbrella under which all of these far-right parties sit is almost too huge to contemplate. For example, Marine Le Pen's outfit, which is no longer called the Front National, it's called something else these days. I'll remember what it is called in a moment. But they have cut off some contact with the AfD. Those are Nigel Farage's friends in Germany, because one of their senior politicians talked about the SS in fairly warm words and talked about how they're not all National Rally, of course, the Rally National it's called, talked about how they're not all criminals and should be sort of a little bit of historical revisionism in the case of the SS, which should get you a column in Andrew Neil's Spectator magazine, but is still considered to be beyond the pale by the far right French party. So that they've sort of ceased contact. But the AfD, who are riddled with Nazi legacy, I think, wasn't the woman that invited Farage to address them a few years ago, wasn't she the granddaughter of a senior Nazi? And in the week that we commemorated D-Day, people are voting for these parties. What do they have in common? Well, that's quite easy, actually. What they have in common is that they insist that reducing the number of foreigners or minorities in a country, in a nation, in a territory, would make it better for everybody left there. It would make it better for everybody else. Where that umbrella once again becomes enormous is that they don't actually agree on which minorities should be discriminated against. It's why Islamophobes and anti-Semites can often seem to be at loggerheads with each other when ideologically they're more or less identical, of course. But what you could loosely describe all of these parties that are on the march as believing is that we need to get rid of, well, first of all, we need to stop so many foreigners coming here. Indeed, possibly we should stop all foreigners coming here. And second of all, of course, history has taught us that can move fairly quickly into getting rid of the ones that are already here. So if you are deporting asylum seekers today, then perhaps you will be deporting first generation, second generation migrants tomorrow. And that desire, if you like, is always under the surface. And there it is, really. There is the mystery. I mean, you can't really describe these parties as anything other than anti-migrant. And history's taught us that the tougher the economic situations may be, the higher the cost of living. Rassemblement national. Forgive me, my French translation there was wrong. Rassemblement national. Merci, Oli. They are anti-migrant parties. That is all that they really have in common. Historically, far-right parties then move into things like the sexual autonomy of women. They may be looking at religious freedom. They may be clamping down on media and judiciary. You don't need to reach far into your memory banks to find British politicians attacking judges or even attacking opinion pollsters. The idea of fascism is that you control everything. You are completely in control of everything. And yet it starts off with anti-migrant sentiment. So there are two questions here, really. The first is, in the context of D-Day celebrations, how can so many people in Europe have voted for far-right parties this weekend? And if you are there, obviously in these countries, you'll be particularly well placed to answer these questions. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And then if we want to introduce a domestic angle to it, why is this country going in the other direction? It's weird, isn't it? Why would the United Kingdom appear to be, according to all of the opinion polls, moving leftwards? Now, admittedly, Keir Starmer has, if you like, moved into uncharted territory for a Labour leader when it comes to talking about... Well, no, he hasn't actually, because Ed Miliband did the same thing. They've been promising to bring immigration down for almost as long as the Tories have. But they don't do it with that sort of nativist snarl that people who dream of planes taking off full of asylum seekers deploy. But it is a little odd, given that we have very, very right-wing media in this country. Don't forget that the Daily Mail back in the day was publishing articles by its owner under the headline, "Hurrah for the Black Shirts." And the same owner, in fact, the same man, was exchanging warm words with senior members of the Nazi Party almost up to the outbreak of the Second World War. And there's a certain relish in how the Daily Mail covers this story today. Again, Andrew Neil, of course, who published a paean to the Waffen-SS by a journalist called Taki. He is here writing under the headline, "On everything from net zero to wokery and immigration, Starmer will be way out of step with his beloved EU." These people are just weird. We've left the EU. I mean, our interest in what happens there should be commensurately diminished until it seems they, quotes, lurch, end quotes, to the far right, in which case presumably Brexiteers are queuing up to kick themselves. I don't know. I mean, you've left. It's a far-right parliament and we've left it? How did that happen? So what I want to know from you today is why this is happening. If there's anything beyond don't like foreigners, too many immigrants, I would be particularly interested to hear it. If there isn't anything beyond that, why is it landing now so well? Why is it nudging needles, swinging pendula so effectively now? And why do you think it's not happening here? Why do you think we have a move? And listen, I don't care what you think about Keir Starmer in the context of this question, because he's clearly to the left of Rishi Sunak's Tory party, even if he's nowhere near to the left of centre enough for you. You cannot argue with the simple observation that he's to the left of Rishi Sunak. And that seems to me to be quite surprising. I would have thought, given the attention that we've paid to people who are far right, or certainly very comfortable hanging out with the far right, I would have thought we might have been more vulnerable. Certainly looking at our media, we might have been more vulnerable, more susceptible to these nativist snarls than some of our European counterparts. I need to, before I throw open the phone lines, I need to stress one thing. I'm pretty good at British politics. I'm pretty good at, I presumably occasionally even take you by surprise with some nugget of knowledge that you weren't aware of. I am embarrassingly poor at European politics. I played catch up for years, but I don't know stuff that you, sitting in Denmark or Germany or Austria or France, you might think is bleeding obvious. But this, remember, is a primer for British listeners who are confused, particularly, I think, in the shadow of the D-Day commemorations, although you might not like that juxtaposition. For me, it's very pertinent and very powerful. Looking at these votes in the immediate aftermath of the D-Day commemorations, to me, makes them doubly chilling, even though the numbers aren't as shocking as some people predicted and as some right-wing outlets in this country are sort of reporting a sense of relish that isn't really justified by the numbers. The direction of traffic should concern us, because these are the forces that we fought against in the Second World War. These are the forces of othering minorities, of hierarchies of humanity. The circumstances of your birth or the accident of geography somehow renders you superior or inferior to another person. These are the forces that we, and I use the word loosely, that we fought against. And two things seem to be happening. They seem to be on the rise, and some corners of our media seem to be relishing it. So what is going on? 0345 6060 973. It is 18 minutes after 10. The far right is on the march, or the hard right, whatever euphemism you prefer, is on the march across continental Europe. And many people in this country wonder why. Because we have nativist snarls about immigration just as loud as they are anywhere else, but we don't seem to be part of this process at the moment. Fill your boots on this one, because you almost certainly know more about this than I do if you are minded to ring in. And just to clarify, there's don't waste 10pence texting me to tell me that it's because of immigration. I mean, literally the only thing that any of these parties have in common is a hatred of immigration, a hatred of foreigners, a xenophobia, a jingoism, a nativist snarl, call it what you will. And that bit there introduces the question of why we seem to be moving in the other direction. Andy's in Leipzig. Andy, what would you like to say?
Hi. So I'll try not to repeat myself. I respect your researcher.
No, you can do. Yeah, no one heard that except the researcher. But your phone line's gone a bit funny, Andy. If you could just try and sort that out, I'd be grateful.
I've turned the speaker off. Is that any better?
Yes. Right. Let's crack on.
Right, yeah, okay. So, I mean, I live in Leipzig, which is in Saxony in eastern Germany. The AfD won, and they actually won in eastern Germany for the European parliamentary election. So, overall in Germany, they were second, but in eastern Germany, in all 5 eastern German states, they came first.
Did particularly well among young people as well, which, again, perhaps naively, I find particularly shocking.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is, I mean, I'm from the UK, obviously, and I'm living over here as an expat immigrant. Now, I listened to Radio 4 this morning, where the presenter, I can't remember her name, had an opportunity to talk to the vice chair of the AFD in Berlin. And what did she do? First thing, typical BBC, straight on.
Okay, mate. With respect, I can listen to Radio 4 because I live in London. You're in Leipzig, and I'm looking for perspectives from Germany, not critiques of the BBC.
You can listen to BBC Radio 4 abroad as well.
I know, but I'm trying to... Crikey, what do you want it in words of one syllable? I'm trying to hear perspectives that I can't get in London. So you're in Germany watching the German election, and you can tell me things about it that I can't really get from following British media.
Okay.
And so telling me what you heard on British media this morning is a bit unhelpful.
Let me mention three things then, shall I? First of all, the AFD is not exactly a hard right-only organisation, but it's getting attacked by the establishment in the same way that the Brexit movement was. When the liberal media elite couldn't stand Brexit and the idea of leaving the European Union, they started to call Brexit extreme and anti-migrant and all that. So
it was, wasn't it? You saw Nigel's breaking point poster. I mean, even Dominic Cummings has confessed that without the sort of nativist anti-immigration, what are the big policies that they stand on that are not anti-immigrant and anti-immigration?
What, the AFD?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's say two things. First of all, if you notice, they won in Eastern Germany.
No, I'm just asking, apart from being anti-immigrant, what are the big tickets?
The AFD started as an anti-Euro party, not an anti-immigrant party. It was against the Euro. It was against Germany bailing out the Greeks in the Euro crisis.
Yeah, but that's not what people... That went very well, and that's not what people voted for yesterday. So apart from being anti-immigrant, what are the big sort of policy platforms that the AFD has?
Well, when you say apart from being anti-immigrant, that covers quite a few areas, doesn't it? Because it covers...
Yeah, well, I'm just the anti-migrant party.
Okay, well...
Apart from being... I'm reading that in the Daily Mail. If you don't know, there's no shame in it. I don't know either. But apart from being anti-migrant, what are their policies? What are the big policy platforms?
They're generally anti-federal European Union. That's one of their things too.
But they're not. They don't want to leave the European Union, do they?
There's discussion about it, but
they changed their mind after Brexit. So again, I don't want to sound like I'm hectoring you, but again, if you don't know the answer to this, that's absolutely fine because I don't either.
Answer, but you seem to not want to spend more than 2 seconds listening to the answer.
Apart from being anti-migrant, what do they stand for?
I just told you they're anti-EU, they're anti-federal.
But they're not anti-EU, because after Brexit, they decided they wanted to stay in.
They're in favour of ending the war in Russia and Ukraine. They don't.
Okay, there we go. So they want to end the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And again, in the week after D-Day commemorations, that seems, to me at least, a little odd. Do you understand why they want to do that?
I do understand it, because I also don't believe that pouring weapons into a war is generally the way to end it. I think the best thing to do is get sort of negotiated agreement. At the end of the day, that's the only way to end the war, isn't it?
Okay, so Putin talking points and anti-migrant. I'm more troubled or confused about how this could be appealing to people, particularly perhaps in Eastern Germany, who well, maybe that's why. Maybe those historic links with the Soviet Union run a heck of a lot deeper than people over here can fully understand, Andy, which is the kind of thing I was hoping you might be able to explain to me rather than critiquing Radio 4. Joe's in, well, let's try Western Germany. Is it Duisburg, Joe?
Duisburg, James. Duisburg. It's between Dusseldorf and Cologne.
There we go. You weren't born there, I would hazard from your accent.
No, I was born in Manchester, mate.
There we go.
So I've recently my partner's German. We've been together 17 years. I've recently just moved over to Germany in the last 3 months looking for work. Bit of a nightmare because of the post-Brexit situation.
Yes.
Well, that's another story. But I just wanted to comment on the rise of the AFD. And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that the mass migration that happened under the Merkel government was really badly handled. And there's a lot of resentment within the country about how badly that was handled. You had nearly 2 million migrants in the last 10 years move into Germany. And there's a lot of tension. I feel it in society. I feel it when I go to the shops. I feel it everywhere. here.
What do you feel? Tell me what you mean. Tell me what you mean.
Well, it's the way people look at each other. It's the feeling that you get. It's the kind of looks of kind of distrust and suspicion, really.
Do you get it as an immigrant? Do you get it as well?
No, because I'm a 45-year-old white guy from Manchester, and I don't get that at all. But
so who gets it then? Brown people. No, and there's a distinction to be made here, James. There's a massive Turkish diaspora within Germany, and they came over in the 70s. They were invited over to rebuild the country post-reunification, and the Turks that have settled here and have integrated, and that's the important word here, integration. Right.
And this is what those Turks have integrated well. They've set up businesses, and the recent migrants, a lot of Germans feel they haven't integrated well. Germany is a very conservative society. You walk into the doctor, everyone says good day. It's basically, I call it like England was about 50 years ago. And they don't like the fact that people don't speak German, they're not employed, they feel that people are coming over to take advantage of the benefit system.
So if these are all very familiar tropes, aren't they, to anyone who's been following British politics. So what does the AFD promise to do to these people then that have already been welcomed in? I mean, one thinks of Merkel's offer to the million Syrians, which was stunning at the time for two reasons. Number one, it flew in the face of most political attitudes in Europe, and number two, as you've described, it did seem perhaps to be storing up all sorts of tensions and problems for the future. But what is the AFD promising to do with the people who are already there legally, crucially?
Well, the people that are already here legally,
like you,
like me. I mean, I think I'm not here legally yet, James. But
well, keep that under your hat. The people might start looking at you suspiciously.
No, but I mean, it's difficult because there's what they say in public and then what happens, what they really believe in private, and they're very careful not to say, well, we're going to kick everybody out. We don't want immigrants, and we don't want to kick everybody out. I was actually looking at before the elections. I was looking on their website last week, and it's not actually clear. There's a bit of contradiction in what they say. They say, we don't particularly want to. We're not going to kick people out who are already here, but we want to stop illegal immigration. And their big thing is, and this is what they're playing on, is this tension in society where they see immigrants coming in. There was a knife attack by immigrants just in the train station a couple of weeks ago near where I live. And people are angry because they see that the immigrants that come in and commit crime are not properly dealt with.
That's an incredible generalisation. For can you speak German?
I'm bisschen, yeah.
Genuinely, I mean, could you do a job interview in German?
Well, funnily enough, I've actually got a job interview in about 4 hours, but it won't be in German; it'll be in English.
It will it? Okay.
Yeah. I don't speak. I speak German good enough to understand what's going on.
I don't want this to sound aggressive, but the way you talk about immigrants completely ignores the fact that you are one.
Well,
so why are you not part? I mean, so what is it? You mean Middle Eastern immigrants or brown-skinned immigrants or Muslim immigrants? They're the ones. Yeah. One person commits a crime and 2 million people get the blame for it, but you don't.
Well, this is this is the issue. This is the problem, James, and that's the problem. And I always say to people, you get idiots in every race, in every walk of life.
Yes.
You shouldn't judge people based on the colour of their skin. You should judge people based on what they do, and the colour of their skin has got nothing to do with it. Okay?
No, and I mean, the other thing, just for clarification, quite a lot of people listening in Germany are pointing out that the discrimination that Turkish Germans faced and that the unpleasantness that they faced would have been, even going back 30 years, 40 years, would have been very similar to what you're describing now for Middle Eastern. So integration never really happens overnight. Richard, for example, writes, I'm in Germany. My German wife is shouting at the radio. They stand for nothing else. They are only anti-immigration. And I don't know why this has a sort of controversial air. I don't know why, that there's a sense of pointing it out upsets people, because surely it's the only thing that we can all actually agree on, is that far right means anti-migrant. Even when they can't agree with each other about which migrants they're anti, it just means anti-migrant. And there might be some rational cases for saying we need fewer people coming here from there, or we need fewer people coming here in general. But vague anti-migrant rhetoric, blaming minorities, blaming foreigners for the problems that your country faces, historically never goes well for anybody, especially for the migrants. But there shouldn't really be a tension here, because this is the one thing everybody agrees on. I guess if you're signing up for these sort of parties and someone points out that all they stand for is a vague anti-migrant ideology or outlook, maybe you don't like looking in that mirror. Maybe that, not Joe at all. And good luck with the job interview, Joe. I wish I knew the German for good luck. If you don't like looking in that mirror, so what does the AFD stand for apart from anti-migrant, anti-foreigner? Whether they live here, whether they're coming here, whether they're theoretically coming here at some point in the future. And you can't say what else they stand for or what else they build their support on, then that's a mirror that you might not like looking in. But that's not my fault, is it? That's the reflection that people see. 10:31 is the time. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 10:34 is the time. A few of you a tiny bit unhappy with me for using languages like shockwave and on the march. The results, you're quite right, are not necessarily on the kind of level that you would expect if those words were to be deployed. The grouping of far-right parties actually lost a seat, I think, and the centre, as Pippa points out in a tweet that has the graph, which I've seen a few times, with the grouping that would see all of these parties sit together, even though they don't agree with each other about everything, is still a relative minority. I think Ursula von der Leyen's status as leader of the European Parliament is safe until about 2029 now, after these results. President of the European Commission is the proper title. But when you see the D-Day commemorations last week, and then you see young people, particularly in France and Germany, voting for and cheering for far-right parties whose real existence is built almost entirely, as I think we've demonstrated, partly intentionally, partly unintentionally, almost entirely on a promise to do something about foreigners, to do something about immigrants. It suggests that the lessons of the D-Day commemoration are not being heeded, doesn't it? 10:35 is the time, and the only person who will really be celebrating these kind of movements across continental Europe, our first caller alluded to, would be Vladimir Putin. It's pretty obvious, and I wonder whether, I don't know, I wonder whether that, if you like, fermentation of instability, which we saw first in USA and UK, is now reaching into continental Europe. Elaine is in Nice. I have this beautiful switchboard, this. Berlin, Annecy, Amsterdam, Nice, Bavaria, Barcelona, Leiden in the Netherlands, and Maidstone. Elaine, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Big fan.
Thank you.
Really happy to speak with you.
Likewise.
And I was just giving my perspective on this living here. And my tuppence worth is that Macron's doing a bit of a David Cameron. And that where David Cameron might not have believed that we would leave the European Union, Macron doesn't believe that the far right can get a parliamentary majority. So it's a huge gamble.
Yes. Or actually, I read an even more complicated analysis of it, which would be even if the Rassemblement National ends up with a prime minister in place, which is this very young chap, he would make such a mess of things that by the time the presidential elections come around and Marine Le Pen runs again, the damage to that movement, to that party, would have been done. But you're right, it does seem to be a very big risk, a very big gamble.
Yeah, and I also agree with what you just said, because I read something similar this morning, that he would make such a mess that then finally he could turn around and say, see, these people are just rubbish. They don't know what they're doing. These people being the far right, of course. But it also might be, I think, a way of pushing the French left to get organised, because there's no real opposition here. there's Macron, far right, and then the left is just kind of, since, what's his name, the one that got caught in New York? I can't remember his name now.
I don't know. No, I don't know. I told you. You're supposed to be educating me on European politics, not coming on and advertising your own forgetfulness. I don't know. So there's no obvious focal point to go after Macron from the left of Macron. Everything is coming from the right, because he's already...
Everything's coming from the right, yeah.
Okay, and where does it come from? How do you account for it? And I'm going to ask you, if you can, although obviously you don't have to include the view of the D-Day commemorations in Normandy in the rearview mirror, just to have that in the rearview mirror from just a few days ago, and then to have this on the road ahead seems to me incongruous. So how has that come about?
I get it. And I think there's what I've heard and read is that young people here are not that interested in the D-Day commemorations. It's a long time ago. It doesn't matter. It's 80 years ago. And also, I have a friend who has a son in his 20s, and he's so into this Rally National.
Oh, really?
And it's social media.
What are they offering him? What are they offering him? Do we know?
Well, what I say is not my words, right?
No.
But he believes that we should get rid of the Arabs.
Yeah.
It's the Arabs that are causing the problems in France. And it's not true. It's so not true.
There'll be problems caused by every grouping. There'll be some unrepresentative examples of it. And his social media, because I see quite a lot of this, given my status as catnip for fascists on Twitter. These accounts that are dedicated to crimes committed by people of colour or Arabs or Muslims or foreigners, and as if crimes are never ever committed by any other demographic, and if you're young and not too thoughtful, you're going to swallow that wholesale.
Absolutely. And particularly here in this region in France, the party gets a huge amount of votes because
Always
it's very traditionalist.
Always has done. Well, Brigitte Bardot lived up in the hills just around there and ended up flirting with this political movement. Why is that? Why is the South? I was stunned by the number of posters last time I was in Nice, by the number of posters for Le Pen's outfit. Why does that have a particular affinity with far-right politics?
Yeah, I think they've never really managed to integrate. So if you look at Nice, a beautiful town, and on the outskirts of the city, where people with, who don't have so much money live and tend to be higher.
The poor suburbs, same in Paris.
The poor, same as Paris. And the two don't mix.
It's more ghettoised.
It's more ghettoised, and this view here, they're taking over the world, and it's.
Do you know? Listening to this,
out of the words of people, mouths of people that I know, and I'm like, how can you believe that?
We need to get rid of the Arabs. It's a chilling phrase, isn't it? You can swap out Arabs for various other minorities throughout history, and the lessons are pretty clear. Oh, hang on, Dominique Strauss-Kahn.
Oh, that's it.
There you go.
Yes, that was the one.
Sacre bleu. You're welcome. Thank you, Elaine. Friedman is in Berlin. Friedman, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. The reason I called is I was very impressed by your introductory words when you said you don't know much about what's going on in Europe and you like to hear from people who do. So it's not very often in this day and age that people say, please tell me something.
Yes. Because
everybody seems to know what's going on. I think I put it very simply. I've studied this for many years. Every European continental country is an experiment. And it has long-term, mid-term, and short-term problems.
Yeah.
France is into its fifth republic. It celebrates that. This is my homeland. It celebrates that every day. Its fifth attempt at a republic. It makes no bones about the fact that they're in an experimental phase.
But on all democracies, all countries are in an experimental phase.
Yes. Yeah. And the big problem with the long-term problem is, did they fight for this and did they actually acquire this themselves? And if you turn to Germany, they didn't. No one in Germany fought or struggled for the system of government they've been given.
God, I'd never thought of it like that.
They never identify with it.
Or even prevailed against a threat in order to end up where they are now, in the way that the UK has, in a sense, in a post-war sense.
Yes,
God,
absolutely.
That's a clever
and this
observation.
is why the stale United Kingdom, if I may interrupt you, I'm sorry, I know I don't have much time on your radio show. This stale United Kingdom system of first past the post, and it's either the one party or the other, is exactly the stability that makes the United Kingdom the United Kingdom, because eventually they will sieve it out. And this is why the UK people don't understand their neighbours, because if you take France, France was invaded in 1870 by the Germans, and a third of the country was taken over, re-educated, and they had camps for that. 1914, they did the same. 1939, they did the same. This makes for a very unsure society.
And
simple numbers on.
Yeah. And does that... So hang on, we are going to run out of time, and you've given me more than enough to chew on. But when you talk about...
These are very insecure countries, and they're still finding their way.
Yeah, but why then does that play into... Well, I mean, we're only talking about figures between 15 and 20%, which I think probably holds true for most democracies when it comes to the appeal of the far right. But why in the current climate?
Yeah, well,
why the climb?
Is going up to 31%, isn't it?
Yes, it is in the EU elections, but not in the national polling overall, I don't think. But
you see, the thing.
Hang on, let me ask a question. Let me just ask you a question.
Sorry.
In a couple of sentences. Why now?
Yes.
Why would this appeal be growing right now in June 2024?
Economic uncertainty.
Always.
And the end of the Christian homogeneity in European societies, they feel challenged. And, of course, the great Christian theory of replacement theory is that they're all going to die out because they don't produce enough white babies and all the black people are coming.
Well, I mean, these are fascist tropes, aren't they? I mean, it's the same as the Jews in the 1930s.
These are fascist principles.
You think they are. You think they're biting. They're actually... Because, I mean, I always think of France as a model of secularity, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, you see, it's still a very, very Catholic country.
Sure.
They did the right thing, just
not
like
terribly Christian.
They nationalised the church and threw everybody out.
Very Catholic, but not terribly Christian. Would you agree with this? Sometimes these simplistic little things that you pick up on social media can actually cut through. So it's like a circle. It begins with an uninspiring centrist refusing to tackle the underlying social problems that lead to the rise of the far right. That's followed by stagnating living standards, creating fertile ground for fascism, so the far right win elections. Yeah. The far right then drives the economy off a cliff, lowers standards of public life, and generally makes everything objectively worse, followed by an uninspiring centrist defeating the far right with a promise of change and moving back to the uninspiring centrist refusing to tackle the underlying social problems that led to the rise of the far right.
That sounds very much like Chomsky.
Well, I think it probably is Chomsky, but it also sounds pretty compelling, except that certainly on this side of the channel, we've never actually had an ostensibly and explicitly far-right party winning elections and then driving the economy off a cliff, although we've had plenty of politicians in recent years driving the economy off a cliff, lowering standards of public life and generally making everything objectively worse. I just don't think most people would have called Boris Johnson and Liz Truss or even Rishi Sunak far right. And for the record, I don't think they should. 10:46 is the time. 10:49 is the time. I'll read this. It's not Idiot's Corner territory, but it's helpful to understand how these sort of delusions work. It's so weird listening to you carry out mental acrobatics trying to think of every excuse for the rise of the far right, but ignoring what the supposed far right tell you. It's not indoctrination. It's watching your country turn into an Islamic hellhole before our very eyes. Mate, if you're watching it on Twitter, it's not real life. There are certainly places where you can go in this country and you may feel as a white person that you are in a minority in that school or in that community. But why is that such a problem for you, given that everywhere else in the country, if you were brown, you'd feel like you were in a minority? Integration involves proportionality. But an Islamic hellhole, you sound like the bloke who rang in last week telling us that Sadiq Khan had introduced Sharia law because he'd seen it on social... Actually, that's not fair. He rang in to tell us that Sadiq Khan had introduced Shakira law in 3 London boroughs. And it only existed, that story, on social media. I don't know how you measure how big a deal that is. How does our friend in Nice's friend's son end up believing that they, quotes, need to get rid of the Arabs, end quotes? If not from social media. It's weird, isn't it? And yet, even weirder, perhaps, is the fact that this country seems to be a little bit more immune to these movements, even though we spend our entire lives, it sometimes seems, talking about them. The results are not necessarily what you'd expect on this side of the channel. Marie is in Maidstone. I have a first caller, I think, from the United Kingdom today, Marie. What an honour. What would you like to say?
Hello. I'd like to first apologise for ruining your wonderfully international board.
Well, you sound, you say, if I may hazard a guess, you sound a little French.
I am, yes.
Well, you haven't ruined it at all then. You haven't ruined it at all then. On we go.
Right. Well, I just wanted to talk about the results for these elections for the European Parliament.
Yes. What do you make of it all?
What I found interesting is I think this is the culmination of many years of hard work from the media. Now, if we take a look at the figures in these elections, you've got 60% of 18 to 24-year-olds who didn't vote, and 66% of 25 to 34-year-olds. Now, if you look at the social structure of France, it's what we call the social armature. You've got the 12 big cities, and the rest of that is mainly rural, mainly elderly.
Yeah.
So in the big cities where you've got that majority of young people and they haven't gone to vote, most of the French map now looks like it's far right. Now, over the last few years...
And these are, sorry to pause you or to interrupt, but these, as often happened here in the run-up to Brexit, these are the communities least affected by immigration. The people who believe, like our correspondent there, Rick, that their country is being turned into an Islamic hellhole are obviously getting all of these scare stories from social media, or they are, like you say, elderly rural communities who are fearful of a threat that is repeatedly thrust at them by people like Marine Le Pen. They're not the people living in the big cities where integration is de rigueur.
Absolutely, and there's been this fear-mongering in the media the last few years.
Right, sounds familiar.
Yeah, coupled with the demonization of the ecologists and activists. So what you found in these elections is that the majority of candidates and options were actually what you'd classify as right or far right, even when they were classified as the centre. And what's interesting about that is that it's been kind of an insidious creep up. So in 2017, it was still the Front National, National Front, which was known as the far-right party. But in 2018, after having seen the election results in 2017, which showed that there was a hike in far-right votes. So in the 90s, it was between 4 to 10% for the far-right. And in 2017, it went up to 24%. So,
and now, and that's in the national polling, is it?
Yes.
Because it was 31.4% in the vote this weekend, but as you've pointed out, that's partly explainable through turnout.
Yes, and actually that 31.4% isn't quite accurate because it's actually 37%.
Okay.
Because it counts also the people who have right ideologies and programs, but have classified them themselves as centre-right.
Okay.
Now,
so what's happening at the moment? What do you think? I mean, I've got the media, I've got the classic, telling people that there are some immigrants around the corner who are coming to ruin their lives. There will be genuine tensions in cities on public services. But that's constant. That's the nature of modernity. That's the nature of the world, if you like, in the 21st century and the 20th century. What's happened recently to give a boost to Le Pen's party?
Well, I think we've got to take the context of the recent years into account. So COVID, most people have been closed up on themselves. The rural villages have gone back to true rural living, true communities. And what's happened in the lead up to these elections was what I consider a mediatic failure, because there was a preference for the buzz rather than the truth. So the most mediatized candidate was Jordan Bardella, and
that's the leader of the national rally of Le Pen's party.
Yes. And the reason why he's had so many votes, in my opinion, is because when he goes and gives his speeches, he isn't rebutted because the media prefers to take these out of context clips of the ridiculous things that he says and then puts those as the headlines. So uneducated, elderly, rural French people will read the headlines and won't necessarily understand the control of the media behind it.
So you could swap out those words there for Farage, Brexit, and Britain, couldn't you? And go back 8 years. People persuaded that their existences or that their lives are going to be improved by listening to this anti-foreigner rhetoric, and then maybe that's the answer to why Britain is in a slightly different position at the moment, is that we've actually had our faces rubbed in what happens when you believe those sort of xenophobic demagogues. Which is the point Macron made about demagogues. I don't want to run out of time. What do you make of the election decision? What do you make of Macron calling or dissolving Parliament? I
think it's like one of the previous callers said. It's very David Cameron-esque, almost Jupiter-like. Charles de Gaulle did something similar. One of our previous French presidents, where he said, "Well, if you don't want me and you really don't think I'm legitimate, well, I'll leave power." I think he's playing that, well, if you don't want to play with me, I'll take my ball and I'll go home. That kind of rhetoric.
Yes.
So what's interesting is that he's doubling down and playing with fire with the far right, essentially banking on the turnout of the young people in this second round of elections.
Yeah.
But as we know from history, that's not necessarily something you can count on.
No, it isn't. Although I do understand why he's done it. The alternative would be to carry on with the sort of British comparisons, which are pretty skimpy, obviously, but not entirely without merit. Then you get that war of attrition. Then you get more years of the demagogues with the sound bites and the largely sort of nativist snarls being picked up by media and reported for clicks and disproportionate representation on television and in newspapers. That's where you get it. Marie, thank you. That's really helpful. This is from Paul. Ha, 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 ha. Have you seen the riots in Dublin? Look at their faces. Not old or ancient. A typical journalist with his head up is beep. That's why you look so pasty. Interesting. Your leftist Marxist days are over. Europe has woken up. James O'Brien is in a coma. Ha, 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 ha. You can't stand it. That's the best bit. I don't think we're disagreeing with each other. I've seen the riots in Dublin, and they are nativist riots by people who've been persuaded to hate immigrants. What you haven't really got is the proof of why they're the problem, as opposed to, for example, cost of living or social conditions or defunding of public services. Paul, there's always going to be people who are ready to blame foreigners. And as we've already established, if you're getting all your news off racist social media accounts, which also encourage you to come out onto the streets of Dublin and riot, then you can end up in the kind of intellectual mess that you found yourself in this morning. Of course I worry about the rise of fascism. That's why we started the conversation this hour by talking about the commemoration of D-Day. I mean, by suggesting that the people who worry about the rise of fascism are the problem, you kind of put yourself in the camp of somebody who embraces the rise of fascism, which means that, and obviously in Ireland this is a slightly more complicated story than it is in the United Kingdom, given their neutrality during the Second World War, but it means that you're on the side of the forces that were defeated in the 1940s, as opposed to on the side of the forces that prevailed. And it was those forces, of course, that were being properly commemorated last week. I should get paid for these sort of lessons. 3 minutes after 11, another dispatch from Dublin, this one from Darren. James, they aren't natives in Dublin upset by immigration as a deeply philosophical issue. They are knackers and thieves who've never done a day's work in their life, worried that the immigrants are taking their dole. On we go. I like this conversation, partly because it has demonstrated the astonishing reach that this programme has now into continental Europe in particular. It's no use to me. That's why I said I should get paid extra for helping out our friend with understanding history. I should get, because this doesn't reflect on my radars. If you're listening in Leipzig or Berlin or Nice or anywhere else, it doesn't reflect on my radar. So it doesn't influence. I know you're very, very worried about this. So it doesn't impact on all my bonuses. She's terrible. But these are the crosses I bear on your behalf. I think we'll do a little more on this. Up next, I'm tempted to return to AI. We said, didn't we, that we would come to it intermittently as the technology advanced. Apple getting in on the act now. A nice fellow who rang in from Berlin complimenting me on having the confidence to say I don't really understand an issue. I sense he doesn't listen that often. I quite often confess that I don't really understand an issue, rarely more than on matters technological. But as Apple is bringing ChatGPT to Siri, I understand that. I know exactly what that means. Apple is bringing ChatGPT to Siri, and they'll call it Apple Intelligence. And I still don't know what I'm supposed to be worried about. I still don't know that I am supposed to be scared of. I think that word I used there, possibly from that Dublin texter, may have been a derogatory term for travellers, if it's not one I've ever come across before. So I apologise for that, if indeed it is. 11:05 is the time. Morris is in Fulham. Morris, what would you like to say?
Hi there. Morning, James. Thanks for the show and thanks for what you do. I must say that you gave me sanity during the before the Brexit and during and after the Brexit vote as a black French citizen that's moved to London in the early 2000s. So thank you so much for what you've done.
Well, thank you. That's a lovely thing to say.
It gave me slight hope, if you know what I mean.
Thank you.
Straight to the question. I'm going to try and answer as many questions that you've asked. So, firstly, I think Macron normalized. So you were asking about why young French people have turned to these parties. I think Macron normalized them, and I'll tell you the reason why. When Macron won the presidency in France, because in France compared to the UK, the parliamentary system in the UK, the party with the largest MP selects who leads as a prime minister. Whilst in France, the party with the largest party do not get to select the president, if that makes sense.
Yes.
The president then appoints the prime minister, you see. So when Macron's party, La France en Marche, didn't get the majority of seats in the parliament, he needed to form coalitions, most especially for his immigration bill. Guess who Macron coalesced with?
Yeah.
He went along with the Rassemblement National, the far-right party.
So he's already bent, hasn't he? He's already bent a bit. And that's crucial, I think, to understanding the decision to call the election. Because he can't bend any further, would be his calculation.
That's exactly it. So to the young French citizen in the banlieues, they look at that and say, oh, they're normal politicians then. These racists are normal politicians.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
If the president's willing to talk to them in...
They cease to be fringe extremists. They cease to be fringe extremists, even if they haven't changed at all.
Exactly. I say this as a young black French citizen who's got black French friends still in France, who now tell me that they might vote far right because, mum and dad were wrong about them. Mum and dad got punched in the streets in the 70s. But these guys don't sound like people that are going to beat us up. Look at him. He's 27. He looks like our friends at football.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
I do, yes.
They've done the work. They've done
this is the difference between, I guess, Nigel Farage and Nick Griffin, isn't it? That it just becomes a more palatable version of the same sort of rhetoric.
Exactly. So they sort of normalized it, and they've also played very carefully on the politics of grievance. So, quick example. Remember I spoke about young black French citizens, friends of mine who live in France.
Yes.
They target these young people on TikTok and say, we know that you're black, we know that you're unemployed, we know that you're more likely to be kicked by police, but you're still French. You should get rid of the Afghan refugees because they're going to take your cleaning jobs.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yes. So it's politics of grievance for every group. I've got LGBTQ friends, and they've seen adverts on TikTok that talk to LGBTQ young people, telling them Muslims don't like your lifestyle. Do you see what I mean? It's really crazy.
It's any port in a storm type territory, isn't it? It's what we'll say. So you turn everybody against everybody and claim that you're the ones to get rid of the problem.
Exactly. And seeing as there's a huge cost of living crisis in France, not as bad as it is in the UK, but there is. And there's also a situation where young people are complaining that they can't get on the property ladder in France as well.
Right.
Things are looking harder for them. You get these people on TikTok, on Instagram, telling them that they will hurt those who have hurt them.
Yeah,
you see what I mean?
I do.
It's a nasty, nasty, evil thing that's been done. Your question, just very quickly, about why people in south of France have always gone to that sort of far right wing. You need to look at the map of the old Vichy government. Remember, the Vichy government,
of course, yes,
were the
collaborators
guys that went along. Yes. Yeah. That region falls under the old Vichy government. So there's slight remnants, same way you find, because we shared border on that part of the world with Italy, if you see. And the Italians also have that slight flavor, that slight remnant of the fascist, the Hitleresque.
Yes.
You see what I mean?
Yes, I
do. So you get people in that region. There's slight remnants of this stuff.
So it's a slightly lazy British outlook that everybody in continental Europe was absolutely delighted when they were liberated from the Nazis by the USA and UK. It's a slightly naive reading of continental history, continental
You've got
politics.
to remember, in France, we had a concentration camp for Jews.
Yes.
There are people in France that actually celebrate this quietly.
Yes.
Growing up in France, James, born as a Roman Catholic, a code word to remind me that I was black was to say that I was Muslim. They said, "Oh no, Maurice, c'est un musulman. C'est un musulman, c'est pas un Christian." Guys, I'm Roman Catholic. Baptism, everything, baptized, everything. My name's Maurice, for Christ's sakes. Saint Maurice. But do you see what I mean? So I do.
I admire your sang-froid. I do admire your sang-froid, but that's because you've never known any different. And drawing on that lifetime of experience and of watching these things both closely and with your particular perspective, that France seems to be in a particular place at the moment. I know turnout is crucial, and if you factor in turnout, then only 2 out of 10 young people in France voted for the far right party, as Eddie has just pointed out to me. But 31.4% of the vote it's pretty much double what anybody got anywhere else, oddly, except Italy. So are you particularly worried about the direction of traffic back in France at the moment?
Oh, God, there's a certain word I'd like to use I can't use at this time of the day. I'll just say, James, it scares me. It scares me because remember how I feel. I moved to the UK and then Brexit happened. And now this is happening in France. You asked the question, why hasn't the UK gone this route? It's because we've tasted it here. We know what it is like. We've had Brexit, right? So we know how the economy is tanked. So people, we know what it tastes like going that far. In fact, the French far right say things like, "Oh well, the Anglophonie have tried it, and they've taken the brave step. Let's be brave like the Americans when they voted Trump." And, obviously in the UK went. So they say things like that. They say things like...
Why then do you think, drawing on your sort of experience of both countries, why do you think we are apparently at odds with these movements on this side of the channel? Why the UK is not as susceptible to some of these tides as perhaps France is? Because we could be.
Main reason, first of all, is because there's a huge sway you're feeling in the UK that the UK actively fought against fascism.
Yes.
The UK actually rallied the Americans and the Canadians to come in and fight. James, I studied this stuff as a friend, so I looked at the UK with a bird's eye view and, wow, this is amazing type thing,
Yes.
So the UK actively fought these systems. The UK went invaded by the Germans. They only tried to bomb, during the Blitz. The UK actively mobilized people. Well, we just celebrated it last week, right? So the UK actively mobilized. So the UK, there's a certain sentiment in the UK that, no, this isn't our lot. The UK marched against the black shirts.
Yeah, although the Daily Mail supported them. But maybe we spend too much time looking at these extremities and not giving the great British public credit for actually having some rejection of these kind of ideas in their DNA. They're historical.
James,
DNA.
let me give you a quick flavour. Whilst the UK marched against black shirts, French parliamentarians were being anti-Semitic to a French Prime Minister, Leon Blum, called him all sorts of names, in the parliament floor, just to give you a flavour of where I'm coming from.
Yes.
So we had collaborationists in France, and in the UK, don't get me wrong, we had the resistance as well, fierce resistance. But the nation was conquered. The UK was unbowed. The UK
who knows what would have happened here. But it didn't, and it's important to remember that. Maurice, an awful lot of love coming in for your contributions, for which I am very, very grateful, and with which I completely concur. And indeed, as Maurice was speaking about some of the differences between the UK and continental Europe, this headline appeared in front of me. Nigel Farage pulls out of BBC interview at last minute amid Hitler row. I mean, you couldn't make it up, could you? You couldn't make it up. It is 11:15. 11:17 is the time. I know Nick's already made this joke several times this morning if you were listening to the breakfast show, but Mel Stride deserves some sort of award, doesn't he? Is he the only member of the government that's giving interviews at the moment? I know a couple of others had tried. I don't know if you want to hear that interview again that the chairman of the Conservative Party gave to John Craig as part of the pulled clip. When this actually happened yesterday. Eleanor doesn't know this because she was off yesterday. So the chairman of... I'm just going to tell the producer something. All right, everyone else talk among yourselves. So the chairman of the Conservative Party had an absolute nightmare with John Craig, who was asking him about the specific details of his own political electoral situation. And he just kept saying Emily Thornberry. And so John had sort of called time on the interview, and the advisor got involved and said, "You can't do this. You've agreed this, and you've agreed that, and all the others." And I was going to do a joke, right, about how this advisor must have been seconded from Susan Hall's mayoral campaign. So I did the joke upstairs in the office, and the lads all said, "No, he really is. He really was seconded from Susan Hall's mayoral campaign." So I couldn't do the joke. It was one of those examples of the truth being stranger than fiction. It's also perhaps an illustration of why Mel Stride is now pretty much the only senior Conservative doing interviews at the moment, albeit that, of course, what's his chops? Rishi Sunak did one with Nick Robinson last night, and tonight Nigel Farage was supposed to be doing one, but he won't be. The headline that The Independent runs with is Nigel Farage pulls out of BBC interview at last minute amid Hitler row. And this involves the story that I told you about yesterday. I may refresh your memory of it shortly, but Annabelle is in Lüneburg in Germany and keen to talk to me about these election results. Annabelle, what would you like to say?
Hi,
Hello.
James. Yes, I'm in Lüneburg today, but I'm based in Berlin actually.
Okay.
And we're all floored by the election results, obviously. And what I'm particularly freaked out by, frightened by, is how many young people vote for the AFD in the CDU. You know, it's like one of your earlier voters was talking about how there's such a high lack of participation in voting in France among young people, and in Germany it's just they're all voting far right. You know,
Really?
A friend of mine, not all. I'm obviously exaggerating, but
Of course.
a frighteningly large proportion are. And I mean, a friend of mine, she works in political education. Like she goes into schools and does workshops in schools about the European Union, right? And she was doing one the week before, like last week, and she was saying how like floored she was by how basically she got them to do like a, you know, when you answer questions and the quiz tells you who to vote for in the end, right?
Yes.
It's like one of those, and like they were the pupils who were 16 voting for the first time in Germany, boasting about how high their percentage was for the AFD, like their affinity to these far-right parties. It was cool to be voting for them.
Where's this come from, do you think? Well, what is the kind of rationale for it? And I guess the younger you are, I would have thought, particularly if you're still at school, the harder it would be to persuade you that it's all because of foreigners, that you're not getting the slice of the pie that you think you deserve. So where do you think this...
And also bear in mind, this school was in Friedrichshain, which is one of the most diverse areas of Berlin. Like, it's not in the boonies in Brandenburg.
Right.
It's like right in the heart of Berlin where this was happening.
So it's cool to be far right. I mean, an anecdote is not data, obviously. The plural of anecdote is not data, but you're obviously worried enough to think this is pertinent to the bigger picture.
I mean, that is... I mean, that it's acceptable enough. I mean, that it's cool. That you know, like it's not something that people are secretively hiding, you know, the fact that they support the far right. It's like, it's like you're only a man if you vote far right.
Good
like,
Lord.
you know, that was something.
And
that
do we
came
know
up
what were the
narrative.
seeds? If these are the blooms, what were the seeds? Do we know?
I mean, in Conversations with Irish, we're talking about how, during the pandemic, this generation spent their youth in lockdown.
Online.
And feels like they've... Online, yeah. A lot of it comes from TikTok, obviously. They're very strong on TikTok, they're all right. But also, having, we gave up all of this. We gave up our youth. We've kind of... we've abstained from so much, and all the Greens want us to do is just the Greens are just banning things left, right, and centre. They just feel like they're getting everything taken away, and this is reclaiming that somehow. I mean, but also apparently one of the kind of slogans of the AFD, which was super popular among this group, was donors are too expensive now.
What are?
And so, I mean, donor
kebabs?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, that's something I could get behind, Annabelle.
Maybe, but there's an.
So that is. I mean, we can laugh, but that's an absolutely brilliant example of taking a grievance and turning it into an anti-immigrant trope. So it's somehow the fault of immigration or the fault of foreigners that donors are so. I mean,
there's a massive contradiction there, because the donor come from the Turkish migrant community who we invited in the 60s, right?
Yes, I know.
That's the reason we have doner kebab. So it doesn't make sense to complain about donor.
No, but none of it makes sense. It's just evidence of how easy it is to, once you find the hook for this kind of thing, it's how easy it is to hang almost anything on it, including, it almost sounds like a figure of speech, including the price of kebabs. Good Lord. So you're worried, proper worried, briefly, if you would, about what might happen next.
Yeah, I mean, the next, the kind of national elections are happening next year. And there's a lot of, I think also a lot of, European election votes are always protest votes against the current government, and the current coalition of Greens and Liberals and the equivalent of Labour are just seen as a failure. They fight with each other all the time. And a change
is as good as the rest. I guess the more attention you pay, the more troubling it is that at 15.9%, I think, of the vote for the AFD, which is nowhere near what Le Pen's party got, but there'll be variations on things like turnout and demographic spread. But their lead candidate, Maximilian Krah, is the one who said that SS officers hadn't all been criminals and that some were just simple farmers with no choice but to join Heinrich Himmler's police force. An intervention that was so obnoxious, it saw Marine Le Pen distance herself from their traditional allies, I think, in the European Parliament. I don't know that Nigel Farage has distanced himself from the AFD, who, of course, he accepted an invitation to speak to not long ago. But he is reportedly busy pulling out of BBC interviews because one of his candidates is embroiled in crikey, it's 2024, embroiled in a Hitler row. Maybe this candidate who said that we should have appeased Hitler, we should have actually accepted his offer of neutrality instead of actually fighting the Nazis. Maybe that's what Farage meant when he talks about understanding our culture and our history. He accused Rishi Sunak of not understanding our culture and our history, which all but the most twisted minds would conclude was an attack upon Rishi Sunak's ethnicity and his status as the child of immigrants. But here is a candidate in Nigel's party, Reform UK, claiming that the UK would have been better off if it had taken Hitler up on his offer of neutrality. I don't need to check. I'm sure that Farage will be claiming that it has absolutely nothing to do with that, the reason why he's pulled out of this interview, and it is all because of the price of kebabs. 25 minutes after 11, Annabelle has reminded me, when she talked about young people and furlough, that I have a special edition of Unhinged headline for you today. I think we'll do it after the news. But a special edition of Unhinged headline, by which I mean that the Unhinged headline is only, on this occasion, the beginning of the story. It is arguably the most unhinged headline that we've seen in a very, very long time. No prizes at all for guessing what newspaper it appeared in altogether now. The Daily Telegraph, James. But the afterlife of the Unhinged headline is unlike anything that we've come across before. So we could be looking at an entire new species of Unhinged headline after the 11:30 news. Before that, Clément is in Annecy, an absolutely beautiful part of France that I've had the pleasure of visiting many times. Clément, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
What an honour to speak to you. And I think I'm one of the leaving only Brexit benefit, because Brexit made me come back to France after 20 years in Britain.
Yes.
And I'm living the dream of living by the lake now.
Beautiful.
I know. But the one thing I wanted to say, and which worries me with the situation of the Rassemblement National in France now, is that they've sort of become and branded themselves as the law and order party.
Right.
And what I mean by that is they've kind of cleaned up their act, and I think it was Morris a few minutes ago was saying, they've been talking to the black communities, the North African communities, which are, well represented in France, saying, we've got nothing against you, and all we want to fight for is new immigration, make sure incivilities are coming down in the country, that you will regain sovereignty by renegotiating with the EU. Some of the Brexit talks that we've had in Britain. Sorry, I'm a little nervous, James.
No, don't be. You're doing brilliantly.
To you for years, and I think that they have cleaned up their acts so well that now people don't fear, like they would have a few years ago, don't fear to say, yes, I'm voting RN, and I'm actually proud of it, because what they stand for is France. And I think that's what Marine Le Pen finished off a speech on Sunday after the results, that vote for us because we'll re-establish the pride of France, which, in my humble opinion, I would probably never feel so ashamed having a government of RN if they get to the power. It won't re-establish any pride of being French, at least for me. It'll be a massive shame, because no matter what they're saying now and how they appear to have cleaned up their act, behind there's still that ideology that the problem is the other.
And it's just a slight recalibration. It's a recalibration of other, because they have stepped back from actual Frexit, to coin a horrible word. That is no longer a policy of the party, partly because they've watched Brexit and decided that they don't want any of that. But from what I hear reading between the lines, particularly we're talking, it's Middle Eastern Muslims who are the big problem now, is it? So even North African Muslims are okay, but the Middle Eastern ones are the enemy, or have I misunderstood you?
No, that and maybe I think Morris was talking about the Afghans. So they're still trying to play the politics of envy and putting people against each other, but it's no longer like the white Frenchman versus the North African Frenchman. It's like that new immigration that's coming up. Therefore for them it's easy to rally the North African second, third, fourth generation, the African second, third, fourth generation, with the actual white Frenchmen against that new immigration.
So they're coming over here, and that's how I guess that's how UKIP ended up with ethnic minority candidates as well. Some of these tides are obvious. Some of them do cross the channel, and others are peculiar to France, or peculiar to Germany, or peculiar to the United Kingdom. Before you go, on a happier note, Clément, I don't know if I'm sure you've availed yourself of this opportunity, but I've rarely had a more enjoyable afternoon than when I hired one of those little motorboats with a slide on the back on the lake in Annecy. It's just the most beautiful way.
It is a beautiful part of the world. And look, James, I hear you've got to go for the news probably.
This is true. But
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work. Thank you.
You're very kind. Thank you. And you're right.
I discovered you during the pandemic, and
well, I shall endeavour to hang on to you. I shall hang on to you as hard as I can for as long as I can. But you're better at hitting the junctions than I am, because it is exactly 11:30, and Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 11:32 is the time, and for reasons I haven't fully unravelled, the Conservative Manifesto is being launched shortly in Silverstone, home, of course, of the racetrack. But the racetrack's shut, so it's just a sort of building, really, a room in Silverstone. Natasha Clark, keep a very close eye on that speech for us and bring us the choicest morsels, I think, depending slightly on timing, because we've got a guest coming into the studio at 11:45, the rather splendid Naomi Klein, whose new book, Doppelganger, is an absolute corker. You may have heard me interviewing her on Full Disclosure. It's out in paperback this week, but she is also very well placed to talk to us about everything from Donald Trump and the looming American election right through to the unfolding situation in Gaza, which gets a chapter in the new book that wasn't looked at in much detail when the hardback came out. But obviously, the attention of the world has rather focused on that region since. 33 after 11 is the time. Before that, a couple more calls from continental Europe on the question of what is actually happening there and how concerned we should be. No longer part of the European Union, of course. Apologies if you hadn't noticed that. But nonetheless, history teaches us, and last week was a particularly pertinent reminder of these lessons, what happens when the far right gets a hold in continental Europe. And its hold has grown this week, not to the extent that some of the more hysterical commentary would have you believe, but it has grown nonetheless. And I think the callers from France and Germany in particular, worrying about younger people, worrying about a sort of cloak of respectability now settling on the shoulders of the previously repellent, it does point towards a troubling future. A word on Italy, if you'd allow. Giorgia Meloni, and Brothers of Italy, I think, has genuinely fascist, indisputably fascist roots, but many commentators describing it now as more of a centre-right party with a very strong stance against illegal immigration, but not the nativist snarls necessarily that typify the AfD or Marine Le Pen's outfit. And again, although Eurosceptic, the party doesn't want Italy to leave the EU. We talk about Brexit benefits. One of them might be actually the survival of the EU, given that you'd have to be mad to want to leave it now, having seen what happens when you do. 11:35 is the time. Renata is in Bavaria. Renata, what would you like to say? What's going on in your country?
First of all, thank you very much for talking to me. And the second thing is funny because I'm just reading the Naomi Klein book.
No.
Very, very intense.
Good Lord. Well, this is a programme made almost exclusively for you today then, Renata.
Yeah,
it's bespoke radio.
I'm really looking forward to it. I am a member of the Green Party and I have been from the very beginning. So we started in the 80s and we were very successful without having done anything and without saying all that much because we were cool. You know, and in a way, what another caller said to you, that for a lot of young people, the AfD is just cool now because they are the ones that are new and everybody is against them. So I think this is something that has to do with kind of fashion. The other thing I wanted to say or wanted to explain.
So it shocks. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to clarify that. So it's shocking and a little bit rebellious for young people to say.
Absolutely, because you see, the teacher generation, that is the younger generation that has been growing up with the Greens, and they might be all Greens more or less, or liberal or progressive.
Okay, so that makes sense, but it's not necessarily uplifting, is it?
No, it is absolutely depressing because we really lost a lot of votes. But this is another reason why I wanted to tell you about. You see, in East Germany, the people believed that the government could do things if they only wanted to.
Right.
And now they have tried out nearly all the parties. They've tried out the Christian Democrats, they've tried out the Social Democrats, they've tried out the Liberals, they've tried out us, the Greens, and they never really got what they wanted, which was a miracle, and miracle you can't do. But what they have seen is whenever a party enters into government, they have to make compromises. So the real important message the party had originally, like the Greens, defending the environment and so, gets lost in the reality of the day-to-day politics. And the AfD is the only party which had not to prove itself up to now.
Okay, so they have that. So that benefit of the outsider, the heckler, if you like, can throw rotten tomatoes at the stage without ever having to perform properly themselves. I don't,
exactly.
and perhaps more evidence of my ignorance, less just in case it's needed. How could anybody who grew up in East Germany before the wall came down end up with a view that governments can make life better for? Do you understand my confusion?
Yeah, I understand your question, but this is because their government told them. They always had like a double think.
Yes.
They always believed what the government told them because otherwise they wouldn't have lived in quiet and wouldn't have a safe life. They might have believed personally something else. But the general attitude, the government can do. I have a cousin who lives in East Germany, and we've been friends all our life, and we compare notes all our time.
Wow.
And she really tells me that while there was still the GDR, they had the feeling that the history would go around them. They would never been hit by history. They would never been hit by the things other countries were hit because they were like an island, a safe island, whatever safety meant in that thing. And now that they're living as part of the Federal Republic, suddenly they have inflation. They have the war in Ukraine to care about. They have COVID.
Well, this is why the Iron Curtain existed. You can actually, I suppose with the modern equivalent, we just look at what people in Russia think about the war in Ukraine. If you have complete control of the means or the sources of information in a way that's probably inconceivable to the internet generation, then you can persuade a population of absolutely anything. Like North Korea would be an even better example, and that doesn't disappear the minute the wall comes down. That's in your
perhaps it's subconsciously that they really believe the government could do if they wanted, and if they can't do, it is because they do not care for us. So we have to look around for somebody who cares for us.
And then up pops the demagogue claiming to care. And how do they articulate their care? By promising to be horrible to foreigners, to immigrants.
I have a very simple solution for all your problems. All your problems will be gone if only we get rid of the foreigners.
If only we get rid of the foreigners. And we're almost back where we began. And I don't understand why it upsets people so much, because we agree. If you support these parties, it's because you hate foreigners, or you think at least that if we could just get rid of them or stop them coming here in the ways that they're coming, then your life will get measurably better. And that's what people who find that kind of politics repellent agree with you. That is what these parties stand for. I don't know if you're just sort of this desperation to pretend that they stand for more or they stand for something different is, in a way, it's quite encouraging, because it does mean, as we've observed on a few occasions, that when you actually are compelled to look into the mirror, what these mirrors represent, these promises, that you look into it and you see yourself and you don't like what you see. You don't want to be a person who believes that if you could just get rid of foreigners, or as I suggested to you a couple of weeks ago, that elements of the British election may see Brussels being replaced by Muslims as the basis of the empty promises that Renata rather beautifully described. Renata, thank you. I shall tell Naomi Klein that you're currently enjoying her book. I love the idea that the book you've got on the table in front of you is the one whose author we're about to speak to. That's coming up next. Before that, though, a special edition, I think, of this, because this is just brilliant.
Unhinged headline.
So here's the unhinged headline, right? And pay attention to every word on this. This came out. It's been a while, this, but I think it's so amazing that it merits turning the clock back a little bit. This came out shortly after Rishi Sunak promised to reintroduce national service for young people. And someone called Hamish de Breton Gordon wrote a piece in the Daily Telegraph under the headline, wait for it, actually, no, we're going to have another sound. This is so good. So without any further ado, we're going to do the sting, and then I'm just going to read you the headline.
Unhinged headline.
Young people should welcome national service as a way to say thank you for furlough. It is time they repaid their debt to the nation. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hang on a minute, the scheme is aimed at 18-year-olds. They would have been at school in 2020, and therefore they didn't receive any of the they didn't benefit from any of the multi-billion pound scheme to subsidise the wages of people who couldn't go to work. He goes further in the article. He says they had their, and I quote, incomes preserved by an enormous national effort. Now, Unhinged headline, this one appeared online. So it actually started changing in real time as people started pointing out just how unhinged it was. So after a few hours, the headline actually mutated to young people should welcome national service as a way to say thank you for lockdown. So that turned the article into one that was essentially telling the children who let's put it very simplistically, kept their grandchildren alive by having their education and their existences turned upside down by the privations of lockdown, they were the ones who should have been grateful for it, the ones who made the biggest sacrifices. So obviously somebody managed to explain that to the sub-editors and the writers at the Daily Telegraph, because a few hours later, the headline changed again to, "It's time all young people, not just those turning 18, repaid their debt to the nation." And with every headline change, they were actually changing the body of the article as well. So it now reads, "Those young adults who benefited so much from lockdown and furlough, their health and jobs preserved by an enormous national effort, should be given an opportunity to thank their elders for their sacrifices." Which makes absolutely no sense at all. So for the first time ever, we've watched an Unhinged headline undergo real-time evolution. And at the end of that evolution, it was, I think we can say, just as unhinged as it was at the beginning.
Unhinged headline.
It's 11:45. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are waiting for Rishi Sunak to begin his Manifesto launch in Silverstone, which we will bring you the most salient points from that shortly after 12 o'clock. And up next, the author Naomi Klein joins me to talk about all manner of things, but chiefly her new book, or the paperback publication of her new book, Doppelganger, which is, I believe the technical term is a doozy. 11:48 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the conversation takes a slightly different turn now. I'm in an unusual situation, Naomi Klein, because I've already interviewed you for a full hour about your new book, Doppelganger. And what are we going to do now? A kind of truncated version, a précis version of the original interview, or are we going to explore new territory?
Yeah, we could talk about my dog.
We could talk about your dog.
Who has a doppelganger.
Rishi Sunak's Manifesto launch. I don't know. I want to tell you something quite funny. I don't know if you're aware of it, but of course the fundamental basis of the book is you being mistaken for another writer with a similar heritage. Well, it's the starting off point. It's not the basis for the book. Naomi Wolf. Did you know that she's in town as well at the moment?
I just learned that.
And have you seen what she said about London?
She's trashing your fair city.
I'm
feel
in
terrible.
London for the first time in 5 years. It's unrecognisable, grotesque, huge modern buildings, no sign of British culture except for vestigial pubs. And the point is that as she went off the deep end, people thought it was you. Yeah,
so I'd like to say for the record that I have very much enjoyed my time in London.
Yes, quite right.
But that thing of hers, tweet, whatever, I don't know what we're calling them these days, it's interesting because it's also it's anti-migrant. Yes. It's full of right-wing dog whistles, which points to the fact that she's not just my doppelganger, but she's a doppelganger of who she used to be. I mean, she used to come to London and she was celebrated as a liberal feminist. So she's one of these people who has changed during the pandemic years and turned into a doppelganger of her former self. Who knows? She's probably hanging around with Farage, judging by her allies in the States. I would not be at all surprised.
I watch this space. And that is what intrigued you most, I think, this notion of what you call a mirror world, into which you then followed her.
Yeah, she's the white rabbit, and I fall down the rabbit hole. I think lots of people have. I mean, do you have a doppelganger? Is there somebody who you get confused with?
No, I don't think so.
No?
I'm worried now. Yeah. But no, I don't think I'm important enough to have a doppelganger now.
Well, it's not that uncommon an experience because I think particularly in the age of social media, we're all exposed to more people, more faces than our brains are really wired to sort accurately. So we put people into sort of similar baskets. So we're both nonfiction writers named Naomi, and it gets confusing, particularly in the UK where we're North American.
Yes.
So it happens more here than it happens at home, to be honest with you. But I don't think the confusion itself is that interesting. It just becomes a vehicle to grapple with all the ways that we're doubled and confused and changing to...
And an instability at the heart of communication where once we thought things were pretty much cast in stone, I think. Because this takes us all the way to Trump, who features quite heavily in the book, the mirror world that he inhabits.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the political signals are getting scrambled in new ways that we need to understand. You know, you look at a figure like Giorgia Meloni, and I think she's rising and becoming ever more powerful. You know, she's about to host a G7 summit, and she is a seriously, you know, I think quite a dangerous far right figure. But what we've seen is because she presents herself, you know, she sort of reads in a more liberal way. She's playing, you know, the fact that she's a woman in power confuses people. Should this be celebrated from a feminist perspective? And she has really done a huge amount of work rebranding the far right in Europe, and I think making it more thinkable for Le Pen to rise in France. You know, I don't think we have begun to grapple with the way in which she sort of mix and matches railing against the quote-unquote globalists, the international banks, sort of echoing a left that I have been associated with over the years, and then pivoting it to, you know, obviously rabid xenophobia. I mean, the centerpiece of her campaign is anti-immigrant, but then it's also all of this transphobia and all, you know, when she makes these speeches, I am a woman, I am a Christian, as if people are trying to keep her from being these things. And, you know,
the bogus victimhood is a crucial part of the whole.
It's a crucial part,
gameplay.
and also the pivot, right?
Yeah.
That it sounds like you're taking on the big companies, the banks and the pharmaceutical companies, but you never actually do. You just tap into the anger that is actually quite righteous and that you've written about. You know, that sense of this system is rigged, it's broken, it isn't serving you, it isn't delivering, but you don't actually have a plan for dealing with any of it. You're just, you know, feeding off of that anger and pivoting to an attack on really the most vulnerable people in society.
Plus ça change. Why does the royal family feature so heavily, or rather the royal family communications team feature so heavily in your book?
It's not that heavy.
No, I know, but why are they there at all?
Well, I think you're referring to sort of the end of the book and the Queen's passing, and you know, the book is it's about doppelgangers and what doppelgangers are trying to tell us, what it means. In literature and film, when reality starts doubling and we find ourselves in this multitude of selves, it's usually trying to tell us something, that we need to look in the mirror, that we need to see ourselves more clearly. And I think what the left side of the spectrum usually sees when they look at the far right is these are the people who are unhinged. These are the people who have departed into fantasy land, and we are the serious people who are absolutely hinged, and we are the facts and the science and the reality people. And it you know, the truth is that nation states are just a series of fictions. We all believe in certain fantasies. So I was struck that when I was finishing the book, there was the public grieving about. Yes. I mean, you're really making I feel like your listeners are just going to hate me because I'm going to say that I felt that there was a bit of an overreaction to the passing of the Queen.
People can feel grief. You're not criticising that, but I suggested on air that the queues snaking overnight, that could easily have been avoided. That could have been a ticketed system. You know, we have we've got Taylor Swift on tour at the moment.
Right,
you can get huge numbers of people in and out of buildings. And I did it just in passing to point out that there is a decision, there's a deliberate decision somewhere to facilitate this epic, almost medieval pageantry, which many of us found very moving. But it wasn't a kind of spontaneous eruption in the way that it was portrayed as. It was deliberately decided that things would unfold in that way. And that's the sort of thing you're talking about. Because if you think about that objectively, and now perhaps with a little bit of distance people can, it's a little bit bonkers.
Yeah, and you know, I was actually just playing with the fact that in Canada, you know, we're a part of the Commonwealth. I live in Canada, and But in the middle of the pandemic, there was somebody who just declared herself the Queen of Canada.
Yes.
Her name, just a sort of random conspiracy theorist named Romano Didello, and she actually has thousands of followers. And
Why shouldn't she be?
And it just pointed to the fact that, we're all choosing what fantasies we believe in. And I'm not knocking anyone's fantasies, but I would like us to just be a little bit honest that things like trickle-down economics are their own sort of fantasies. And really, we're all kind of looking away from realities that are unbearable. The reality that we are enmeshed in systems of different kinds of depravity and annihilation in our global economy that are hard to look at.
It is like all the best books by proper thinkers. It knits together apparently disparate phenomena in a way that enforces a central thesis. I mean, it's a magnificent achievement. It also has a chapter which probably didn't get the attention it would get now on the situation unfolding in Gaza. How does that fit into the thesis? How does that situation fit into the doppelganger kind of thing?
So the book did come out a month, almost exactly a month before October 7th. I think you and I last talked probably a week before.
Yeah, that's right.
And the book does end in Gaza, and it ends with this sort of grappling. So I'm following my doppelganger into her rabbit holes, and of course, once you go into conspiracy land, you inevitably find yourself confronted with one of the oldest, if not the oldest conspiracies around, which is, of course, that there's a room somewhere where Jews are pulling the strings. And this is one of the most tenacious of the conspiracy theories. It reforms and has different kinds of rebranding
in the strangest places,
right? Like QAnon, right? Which is sort of similar.
Even people who think that they're quite sensible can be persuaded that the Jewish people can get journalists fired or that they control news agendas. I mean, I took a call once. Someone who said it's not anti-Semitic to say that the Jews control the media, James, because they do. And it was quite hard to know how to push back against that kind of.
Well, I think Israel has a very well organized lobby, like many countries,
yes.
And so there is real pressure on journalists, and I wouldn't want to deny that. But I, as a Jewish person, have to insist that we distinguish between Jews as an identity group and an effective lobbying campaign by a nation state,
Precisely.
Which is actually very good. I mean, the nature of an ethno-state, and Israel is an ethno-state, it's a Jewish state, proudly describes itself that way, is that it merges individual ethnic identity with a national project. Modi does the same with Hinduism in India. And so then things necessarily get confused. And frankly, it's why I'm against any kind of ethno-state. I think every state should represent everybody who lives there with full equality. So,
do you think we're going to run out of time? I know it flies by, doesn't it? I've got to go and watch the Prime Minister launch his manifesto, Naomi. Unfortunately,
well, that little thing.
But do you think that prospect that's moved? Well, let's just talk about a two-state solution very briefly. That has moved further away over the last 6 months than ever.
Or closer. I mean, it's unclear. I mean, I think more and more people realize that there has to be a political. There is no military solution to endless occupation, segregation, colonization. There can only be a political solution, whether that's a two-state solution or some kind of one-state federation. The first thing we need is a permanent ceasefire. We need to stop shipping weapons. What else can I jam in there before you get pulled off?
Hey, what we do is we leave them wanting more, you see. So Naomi Klein, the paperback of Naomi Klein's Doppelganger, which has been shortlisted for the non-fiction category at the Women's Prize, is out now. It's out this week. It's lovely to see you. Don't slag off our pubs, will you, on Twitter? Don't go on Twitter, start slagging off our pubs.
Love this town.
It is just gone 12 noon. I'm going to cross live now to Silverstone, where Rishi Sunak is launching that Conservative Party manifesto.
At its bloated, pandemic level, rather than give our armed forces the equipment they need. And when there is a war in Europe, turmoil in the Middle East, China flexing its muscles in the South China Sea, we are in a world of increasing threats, and we must show our enemies that this country, with our allies, will stand strong. Now, this axis of authoritarian states, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, must know that their attempts to destabilize our world will simply not succeed. Now is the time for bold action, not an uncertain Keir Starmer as our Prime Minister. Now, our increase in defence investment will not only fire up our defence industrial base, creating good jobs here at home from Barrow to Lossiemouth, but allow us to stand up for our interests, deter our enemies, and defend our values. It's only we Conservatives, with our iron resolve, who can be trusted to keep Britain safe. Now, we need border security too. The confidence that it is your government that decides who comes to our country and not criminal gangs. And that is why if you vote Conservative on July the 4th, the flights removing illegal migrants will depart in July, establishing the deterrent that will stop the boats. Because when people know that if they try to come here illegally, they won't get to stay, then they will stop coming. And if we are forced to choose between our security and the jurisdiction of a foreign court, including the ECHR, we will always choose our nation's security. But Labour have no answer to this question. As you saw the other week, Keir Starmer simply can't tell you what he would do with people who come here illegally because he doesn't believe it's a problem. Now, with Brexit, we took control of our borders, but migration has been too high in recent years, and we have a clear plan to reduce it. Last year, we announced changes which mean 300,000 people who were previously eligible to come here now can't. And we will introduce a migration cap that means Parliament, your elected representatives, will vote on how many people should be able to come here every year. Our plan is clear. We will halve migration as we have halved inflation and then reduce it every single year. Now, we don't just need military and border security. As Putin's invasion of Ukraine has shown, we need energy security too. It is only by having reliable, homegrown sources of energy that we can deny dictators the ability to send our bills soaring. So in our approach to energy policy, we will put security and your family finances ahead of unaffordable eco-zealotry. Unlike Labour, we don't believe that we will achieve energy security via a state-controlled energy company that doesn't in fact produce any energy. That will only increase costs. And as Penny put it well on Friday, there's only one thing that the GB in Starmer and Miliband's GB Energy stands for, and that's giant bills. Now, our clear plan is to achieve energy security through new gas-powered stations, trebling our offshore wind capacity, and by having new fleets of small modular reactors. These will make the UK a net exporter of electricity, giving us greater energy independence and security from the aggressive actions of dictators. And let me just reiterate that. With our plan, we will produce enough electricity to both meet our domestic needs and export to our neighbours. Look at that, a clear, conservative plan, not only generating security, but also prosperity for our country. And we Conservatives also have a plan to give you financial security. We will enable working people to keep more of the money that you earn, because you have earned it and have the right to choose what you spend it on. Now, Keir Starmer takes a very different view. He says he's a socialist. And we all know what socialists do, don't we? They take more of your money because they think it belongs to them. Now, I know Labour have been taking inspiration from one of Brad Pitt's most famous films, the first rule of Labour tax rises is that you don't talk about tax rises. But we know that the policies Labour have already announced will require them to increase taxes on working households by £2,094. My friends, families cannot afford that, and it is our job to make sure that that doesn't happen. Now, I had to take difficult decisions because of COVID, but now we are cutting taxes for workers, for parents and pensioners. And we are the party of Margaret Thatcher and Nigel Lawson, a party, unlike Labour, that believes in sound money. So today's plans, and you would expect nothing less from Jeremy and me, are fully funded. We will pay for permanent reductions in taxation by controlling the unsustainable rise in working age welfare that has taken off since the pandemic. In this party, we believe that it is morally right that those who can work do work, and that hard work is rewarded with people being able to keep more of their own money. So we will ensure that we have lower welfare so that we can deliver lower taxes. And as Conservatives, we believe that hard work shouldn't be taxed twice. That's unfair. That's why Jeremy has been cutting national insurance contributions that only workers are forced to pay. Our national insurance tax cuts are already worth £900 to the average worker. And we will keep cutting taxes in the coming years, meaning that by 2027, we will have halved national insurance to 6%. That is a tax cut, my friends, worth £1,300 to the average worker. Making more progress towards our long-term ambition to abolish the double taxation on work when it is economically responsible to do so. Now, I also want to say something about the self-employed, because they're the risk takers, the people who graft hard to make a living, who get our economy growing. They embody the most conservative of values, the desire to build something, to create wealth and opportunity. But setting up on your own means you don't have the same security that those on payroll do. So it must be worth taking that risk. We need to make it worth taking that risk. And that means that their taxes must be cut. So, in the next Parliament, we will scrap entirely the main rate of self-employed national insurance. A tax abolished and enterprise encouraged. We want to encourage more people to become entrepreneurs, to set up their own businesses, to try and make something of it. So we will abolish that tax for millions of our hardest workers and create a new culture of enterprise in our country. We Conservatives want a Britain where setting up a business is as natural as taking a job. So we will do more for the self-employed so that they can do more for Britain. Now, security also means a security of knowing that you will have dignity in retirement. So we will also cut tax for pensioners with the new Triple Lock Plus, ensuring that the state pension is never dragged into income tax. Labour, by contrast, would introduce a retirement tax, meaning that for those who rely entirely on the new state pension, they would be caught by income tax for the first time in our country's history. And we know Labour's record. From the 75p state pension increase to Gordon Brown's £118 billion tax raid on private pensions, it is clear your pension simply isn't safe with the Labour Party. And we Conservatives want to spread opportunity across the whole of our United Kingdom. We don't want you to leave the place that you call home to succeed. And ultimately, that is a test of levelling up. So we will give our young people the skills and opportunities they need to succeed in today's world. We won't cling to outdated ideas, such as the belief that the only route to success is through university. So we will curb funding to rip off degrees and use it to fund 100,000 new high-quality apprenticeships. We will build on the success of our education reforms by introducing the Advanced British Standard, which will enable our young people to receive a broader education and break down the split between technical and academic education that has so held our country back. We'll invest in a new form of national service to give our young people the chance to enjoy new experiences, learn new skills, and feel a sense of community, belonging, and national purpose. National service will help us build a more unified, more cohesive society so that we can be secure in the knowledge that we are all on the same side. And we Conservatives also want to create a society in which everyone has a chance to own. In the last 5 years, we've delivered 1 million new homes. In the next Parliament, we will go even further, delivering 1.6 million new homes by speeding up planning on brownfield land in our inner cities and by scrapping defective EU laws. And we will go further, because we Conservatives believe in tax cuts. So, for young families, for the first-time buyers purchasing a home up to £425,000, we will abolish stamp duty entirely. And that's not all we'll do. We'll also introduce a new form of Help to Buy, a new Help to Buy scheme to get a new generation onto the property ladder, all part of our plan to build an ownership society where more and more people have the security and pride that comes from owning your own home. From Macmillan to Thatcher to today, it is we Conservatives who are the party of the property-owning democracy in this country. In fact, we want to make life easier for people at every stage of their lives. So we'll also give working parents 30 hours of free childcare a week from when their child is 9 months to when they start school. We'll make child benefit fairer and simpler by moving to a household system that no longer penalises single-earner households and ensuring that any family that earns less than £120,000 a year will receive it. That tax cut is worth, on average, £1,500 to 700,000 families, showing, once again, it is we Conservatives that are the party of the family, and we will always champion them. And we want all families to have the peace of mind of knowing that the NHS will be there for you if you fall sick. So we will increase NHS funding in real terms every year and train and recruit more doctors and nurses every year. We will make the NHS work better through investing in new technology and reforming how it works. You should know that if your kids have an earache or a sore throat or a chest infection, you can get quick and rapid treatment without having to take time off work, and so we will expand our fantastic Pharmacy First programme. But parents should also feel that it's safe for their children to walk home at night. So we will recruit 8,000 new police officers, one for every neighbourhood, and cut antisocial behaviour through intensive hotspot policing. And we will protect women and girls by guaranteeing single-sex spaces through an amendment to the Equality Act to make it clear that sex means biological sex. Now, Labour like to talk the country down. They want to pretend that everything would be great if they had never left office and pretend that somehow we have not achieved anything. But that's just simply not right. Remember the note that said there's no money left? When Labour left office in 2010, unemployment was higher than when they came into government. Public and private debt was accumulating. The banking system was broken. The deficit was ballooning. And even Labour accepted that after years of spending, significant cuts in public expenditure were required. They went into the 2010 election admitting they would have to make cuts. Labour left Britain on the brink of bankruptcy. Worse, the money that Labour had put into public service had not been accompanied by sufficient reform. Labour's welfare system was more about disguising how many people were out of work than actually getting people back into employment. And for all the money that Labour had put into education, our schools were falling down international league tables. And almost half of Labour's increase in the NHS budget had been swallowed up by higher pay and more bureaucracy. And despite that awful inheritance, we've delivered the third highest rate of economic growth in the G7, created 4 million jobs, 800 a day. With Kemi using our Brexit freedoms to open up new markets, we have now overtaken France, the Netherlands and Japan to become the 4th biggest exporter in the world. And we Conservatives under David took the difficult decisions to repair the public finances and control the national debt. And that meant that when COVID hit, we could support people and businesses with furlough, deliver the fastest vaccine rollout in the world, and provide record funding to the NHS. We reformed welfare by capping benefits and introducing universal credit. Ian's reforms mean that now work always pays. We've reduced absolute poverty. We've reduced child poverty. We've reduced pensioner poverty. We've cut carbon emissions by a third, maintained our position as NATO's 2nd biggest defence power, and Boris and Ben and Grant put the country at the forefront of defending Ukraine against Russian aggression, because Britain will always stand up to tyrants. We've halved violent and neighbourhood crime, thanks to the work of Home Secretaries from Theresa to Priti to James, and improved standards in our schools. Thanks to Michael's reforms and a generation of inspiring teachers, English school children are not just the best readers in the United Kingdom, they're the best in the Western world. We strengthened our United Kingdom with the forces of separatism in retreat. We legislated for equal marriage, and now it is not even surprising for so many people from diverse backgrounds to sit around our cabinet table. I know you'll agree with me. We may not have got everything perfectly right, but that is a record I am mighty proud of. Now, this country has a proud past and a bright future, and I believe in that innate confidence in ourselves that has always run through our island story. And just as we're proud of all that we created, invented and discovered in our past, so we can be confident and optimistic about what we will achieve in our future. But I'm not blind to the fact that people are frustrated with our party and frustrated with me. Things have not always been easy, and we have not got everything right. But we are the only party in this election with the big ideas to make our country a better place to live. Labour offer no solutions to our problems. They would only make them worse. And all a vote for reform or the Liberal Democrats does is allow Labour to do whatever they want to our country. Do not forget that Keir Starmer is asking you to hand him a blank cheque when he hasn't said what he'll buy with it or how much it's going to cost you. Just think about what Labour would mean. Higher taxes for every working household. Can you afford £2,000 more in taxes? French-style labour laws that will lead to higher unemployment and more strikes? A ballooning welfare bill? Higher immigration and more net zero costs? Their policies will mean, as they let slip this weekend, bigger class sizes because of their desire to slap VAT on school fees. Labour would cave into the demands of the public sector unions, putting up your taxes to meet the unions' extortionate demands. And Keir Starmer will also use that blank cheque to change the rules of the game to his benefit, giving 16-year-olds the vote, not because he believes they are adults. He doesn't want them to serve on a jury or do any of the other things that adults do, but because he thinks they'll vote for him and that will make it harder to remove him from power. If Labour win this time, they'll change the rules so that they are in power for a very long time. So if you don't know what Labour will do, don't vote for it. If you're concerned about what Starmer isn't telling you, don't vote for him. And if you're worried about what Labour's £2,094 of tax rises would mean for your family's financial security, don't vote for them. In conclusion, let me say this. We Conservatives will always stand for our values, for aspiration, for freedom, for opportunity, for security. Your Conservative MP will deliver lower taxes, lower immigration, protected pensions, and a sensible approach to net zero. Now, our country wants a clear plan and bold action. Our country needs a secure future, and it is this Conservative manifesto that will deliver it.
You're listening to LBC, in case you're wondering. Rishi Sunak, the Conservative leader, unveiling the Conservatives' manifesto. I'm not sure there was anything brand new in it. I'll double check for you shortly, but I am going to stay with this despite various entreaties for me not to. This is a general election campaign. He is currently the Prime Minister. I'm going to stay with it for the questions from the media, which he hasn't really faced properly since that D-Day debacle. The interview on the BBC last night notwithstanding.
Right, we've got lots of questions from the media to come, so the fun hasn't stopped. Here we go. Let's start with GB News.
Prime Minister Christopher Hope from GB News. You stand in front of a slogan saying clear plan, bold action, secure future. Well, why not be bold and commit to pulling out of the ECHR if it keeps stopping the small boats?
Thanks, Chris. I've been clear throughout that I believe that our plan is compliant with all our international obligations. But I've also been clear, and the manifesto is crystal clear, that if we are forced to choose between the jurisdiction of a foreign court, including the ECHR, and our country's national security, then I'm going to choose our country's national security every single time. Next, we go to the FT.
Prime Minister, George Parker from the Financial Times. You represent a northern seat for Richmond. You've seen the opinion polls. You've seen Keir Starmer campaigning in the north of England. Do you reflect on the last 5 years and consider you may have let down the areas you promised to level up, and whether indeed there's a reckoning coming?
George, I don't know if you were here before, but I don't know if you heard the speech from the Conservative Mayor of Teesside, who is right here. And I'll take a second to pay tribute to Ben and all our fantastic MPs in the Tees Valley for what they've delivered for the region. I mean, Ben gave you a flavour of it before, because we've been working together since I became an MP. You talk about the north. Teesside was an area that Labour neglected for decades, took it completely for granted. And it was Ben and our MPs and councillors that transformed the region. And I was fortunate to be able to work with them to help do that. But if you go around Teesside now, every high street and town centre, Eaglescliffe, Yarm, Stockton, Darlington, Hartlepool, is getting investment from our various levelling up funds. The new Brexit-enabled Freeport is creating unbelievable high-quality jobs in the industries of the future. The Treasury campus is in Darlington, and as Ben said, it's one thing for Treasury campus to be in the north, but it's not in Newcastle, it's not in Manchester, it's not in Leeds, it's in Darlington, because towns matter, which is why we're also backing 130 towns across the country, including in the north, with £20 million each, so local people can invest in their priorities. But more than any of that, what Ben and the team have done, what the Conservatives have done, is give everyone in Teesside a sense of confidence and optimism about their futures. Next, we go to the BBC.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Chris Mason, BBC News. For much of the last 18 months, you've tried everything to try and revive Conservative fortunes, and not much appears to have worked. Could we rename this document today your Last Chance Saloon? What do you think is in this that can shift things that perhaps haven't shifted up until now? Thank you.
Well, Chris, I've been very clear when I got this job. We'd been through a very difficult time as a country. But thanks to the hard work and resilience of the British people and the actions of the government, we have truly turned a corner. Inflation back to normal, the economy growing, wages rising, energy bills falling. And that's why this election is right to talk about the future. The future that we want to deliver for our country is one where, above all, families will have financial security because their taxes are being cut. Look at what this manifesto contains. A tax cut for everyone in work as we halve the rate of national insurance. A tax cut for the self-employed, abolishing the rate of self-employed national insurance in the next Parliament. A tax cut for pensioners, protecting the state pension from paying Labour's retirement tax in the next Parliament, because we believe in a country where you have dignity in retirement. A tax cut for parents, because we want to support working families, making sure that they get support with their children's costs, and a tax cut for all young aspiring homeowners as we abolish first-time buyer stamp duty up to £425,000. That is bold action from this Conservative government, this Conservative party, to deliver a more secure future. But it doesn't just stop with our tax-cutting agenda. We're spreading opportunity through 100,000 new apprenticeships and a modern form of national service. We're ensuring our border security with a new legal migration cap in Parliament and a plan to get the flights off to Rwanda, and we're ensuring our country's energy security, but also doing it in a proportionate way that lowers people's bills, does not saddle them with extra costs in an ideological pursuit towards net zero. That is the offer in this manifesto, and there is a clear choice at this election. We are the only party putting bold action on the table to transform our country. Labour have nothing to say about the problems our country faces and how best to address them. Nothing. Keir Starmer is asking for a blank cheque, and he will not tell people which taxes he is going to put up that are ultimately going to cost them £2,000. So if you want a secure future, if you want lower taxes, if you want your pensions protected, if you want a more sensible approach to net zero, and you want your border secure, vote Conservative at this election.
I have to say, he looks like he wants to come home early again, but I presume he learnt his lesson on Friday from doing that.
Right. Next, Times Radio.
Kay McCann, Times Radio. Prime Minister, Times Radio listeners often tell us that they're fed up that nothing works. They care a lot about the services they use every day. But there is nothing in this manifesto about the billions of pounds of cuts to local councils, to justice, to prisons that are coming down the track in the years ahead. What is your plan to prevent those billions of pounds of cuts? Thank you.
Well, under our plans, Kate, investment in day-to-day public services will continue to rise in the new Parliament. It will continue to rise ahead of inflation. But I also think it is reasonable to look for efficiencies in the public sector. And what we've seen is that public sector productivity since the pandemic has declined. It's declined quite significantly. Now, as the Chancellor set out a little while ago, if we just recover those levels of efficiency that we had a few years ago, so nothing heroic, nothing that we haven't done before, that will free up £20 billion. Right? £20 billion that could be reinvested in public services on everyone's behalf without raising a penny of their taxes. So I think that's the right priority. Right? Recover where we used to be before the pandemic, focus on efficiency and productivity, and you can see that in the NHS productivity plan that we have fully funded. And if we do that, that unlocks billions of pounds that we can reinvest back into the front line to deliver better high-quality services for people. Because, of course, I want to see high-quality services, but as a Conservative, I also don't want people's taxes to have to go up when we can get efficiencies to fund them. ITV.
Prime Minister, Tories in government since 2010 have been pushing up the tax burden, the share of national income taken by tax to levels we haven't seen since the late 1940s. Why should anyone believe you when you say you're going to cut tax?
Well, simply, Robert, because we already have. Look, but I'm upfront with people. I did have to take difficult decisions after COVID. That was the right thing to do. Because when I was Chancellor, I thought the right thing to do was to support our country through COVID. Whether it was supporting the NHS, whether it was a furlough scheme. And when the energy crisis in Europe hit, the right thing to do was to help everyone with their energy bills. Those things don't come for free, and I think everyone watching knows that those things don't come for free. And you don't build our country's long-term financial security by shying away from difficult decisions like that. That's not the type of leader I am. So I did make those difficult decisions. But now that our plan has worked, inflation is down, wages are rising, the economy's growing, we have started cutting people's taxes. This year, everyone in work is getting a £900 tax cut on average, thanks to what Jeremy has done. And we're cutting taxes for businesses, making this the most attractive country in the world for businesses to invest. Something that hundreds of our leading businesses describe as the single most transformational thing that we could do for growth and productivity in our country. Delivered it. So yes, people can trust me when I say we're going to keep cutting their taxes. One, because we've set out a very clear plan to pay for it, because I think the welfare bill is growing at an unsustainable rate, and there is an opportunity, again, just to reverse some of the damage that COVID has done to free up an enormous amount of savings that we can reinvest in tax cuts, but also because that's the type of country I believe in. And that's why people can trust me. I believe in a country where hard work is rewarded. That's why I want to cut people's tax when they're working hard. I believe in a country that encourages entrepreneurship and risk-taking and small businesses, which is why I want to cut taxes for the self-employed. I believe everyone should have the ability to own their own home. So I want to cut taxes on stamp duty. I believe if you worked hard all your life, you should have dignity and security in retirement, which is why we want to cut taxes for pensioners. And there is nothing.
You think you've got problems? I've got to get a phone in out of this in 10 minutes.
That's the same for everyone in this room, which is why we want to support families and we want to cut tax for them too. That's why you can trust me. Can I go to the Daily Mail?
Thanks, PM. Jason Gross from the Daily Mail. You're targeting the self-employed here. Do you think White Van Man can swing this election for you? And on the wider picture, there's a lot to say in here about tax, but unless I've missed it, nothing about the overall burden. Can you today guarantee us that if you get in, overall taxes will be lower by the time you've finished?
Yeah. Jason, because of the measures that are announced in the manifesto, and you can see the document afterwards, the tax burden will be about 1 percentage point lower in every single year compared to the forecast that you saw at the spring budget a couple of months ago that Jeremy outlined. And you talked about a particular group. I do think there is something that is special about those who are self-employed. Now, I come from a small business family myself, but those people who are setting out on their own, taking that risk, do something that's incredibly brave, right? And our economy is built on people like that. They don't have the security of knowing that the paycheck's coming at the end of every month. They're out there working incredibly hard to provide a better life for them and their families, hoping that they can start like that and grow something bigger. And I think that is enormously brave. And they deserve all our admiration, but they also deserve our support. And that's why we want to take the bold action to abolish the main rate of self-employment national insurance in the next Parliament, demonstrating not just that we want people to have financial security, but demonstrating our values and the type of economy and society that we want to build. Telegraph.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Ben Riley-Smith from The Telegraph. Manifestos are about policies. They're also about politics. There's 4 weeks to go. You're 20 points behind in the polls. What do you say to those who say the manifesto isn't ambitious enough and that this won't be a game changer?
Well, Ben, just to repeat what I said before, right? The tax cuts that I went through, tax cut for everyone in work that will be worth £1,300 in the next Parliament as we halve national insurance. Tax cut for the self-employed where we abolish the rate of self-employment. A tax cut for everyone who's wanting to start buying their own home as we abolish the stamp duty for first-time buyers up to 425k. A tax cut for families to support them as they bear their young children, and a tax cut for the millions of pensioners in our society. So yes, I do believe that is bold, and that comes on top of the action we've taken to secure our borders, to get flights off to Rwanda, a new migration cap, and a more proportionate approach to net zero. But the choice at this election is clear, because all elections are ultimately a choice. Either Keir Starmer or I are going to be Prime Minister on July the 5th. If I'm Prime Minister, you will have this bold action. All you've got from the Labour Party is a blank sheet of paper. Not a single big idea that has been put on the table in this election campaign so far.
Labour's manifesto announcement is on Thursday, just in case you were wondering.
National service, which has completely energised conversations everywhere across the country. And yes, not everyone will necessarily agree with it, but no one can deny that it is not bold action that can transform our country, and I think transform our country for the better. Nothing comparable to that from the Labour Party. So as people think about the choice, yes, of course, there are challenges we face as a country, but they should ask themselves, who has the solutions to those? Who is going to do things that are going to actually deliver the change that you want to see? The only thing that is certain about Keir Starmer and the Labour Party is that they're going to put up everyone's taxes, and they're going to put them up by £2,000, and I'm going to fight very hard till the last day of this election campaign so that that doesn't happen. Okay, Sky News.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Central sell to voters from you is, I will cut your taxes. But a recent poll shows that only 1 in 6 voters believe you won't raise their taxes or raise major taxes, compared with 1 in 4 for Labour. Labour's more trusted on tax than you at the moment. That's your record as Chancellor and now Prime Minister. I'm sure it's a disappointment to you. Haven't you blown it now, whatever you say? Thank you.
Well, Beth, I'm actually
You can see why he went to GB News first.
Because when I'd had that job 3-4 weeks and a pandemic struck this country, I saw that it was right to do something radical, to do something bold, because that was what was required to help get the country through it, and we delivered on that. Those are my values, those are the values of our party, and we will always be there to protect this country through difficult times. But we're also a responsible party. We're also a party that's not afraid to take decisions that are in the country's long-term interests, even if they're difficult. You saw that with me when I said, yep, we did all these things, but we do need to also pay these things back and secure our children's financial futures. And you saw that with me a couple of summers ago, where I made the same argument again, that it wasn't right then to start cutting taxes until we had tamed inflation, and now that we have, I've delivered on that. So I'm not afraid to do things that are difficult. The only poll that matters is the poll on July 4th, and I'm very confident as we approach that date, the choice will become increasingly clear for people. There is only one party that will continue to cut your taxes after July 4th, and it's the Conservative Party, and there's one party that's going to put them up, and it's the Labour Party, and that choice will be crystal clear. The Sun.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Harry Cole from The Sun. Your manifesto here says that you'll process tens of thousands of outstanding asylum claims within 6 months. But all the Home Office statistics show that speeding up the processing of asylum claims leads to higher levels of approval. When Labour suggested this exact policy, your own ministers called it an amnesty. So is this what your policy accounts to? An amnesty for asylum seekers? And if I may, on Chris's point, you're hemorrhaging support to Nigel Farage. Why on earth not go harder on the ECHR? Why fudge it? Thank you.
So, Harry, that's just simply not right. Last year, thanks to the improvements we've made, we processed more claims than at any point in the last 2 decades, right? And that has actually helped us release over 100, maybe 150 hotels now back to local communities for normal use. And actually the grant rate, you talk about the grant rate was down last year. It was down. So because we changed how we evaluate the claims, we refused far more than we had in the past. But the choice on migration is quite simple at this election. I believe you need a deterrent. Right? We've done lots of things that have helped us get the numbers down by a third last year, and those are all good and sensible. But in order to fully solve this problem, it just needs to be clear that if someone comes to our country illegally, they can't stay. And that means you need a safe place to send them. That's what the flights to Rwanda will do, establish that deterrent. And I've said what I've said about the ECHR, but I'd also say our act specifically gives ministers the power to make the decisions on Rule 39 things that are handed down by Strasbourg. I would not have put that power in the bill if I was not prepared to use it, right? And also change the civil service guidance to make it clear that they need to follow the ministerial decisions. But I'd also point out that, as we've seen in the last month or so, multiple other European countries all agree that having a deterrent like that, safe third countries to return people, is a crucial part of solving this problem. So when I made my speech just after becoming Prime Minister, I said on this issue, where we lead, others will follow. That is now happening. The only person who has not got that memo, normally he's very in favour of EU alignment, is Keir Starmer. Right? Right, could go to the Express.
Thanks, Prime Minister. Steph Spiro from the Daily Express. The manifesto promises a regular rhythm of flights to Rwanda every month as part of a relentless process to remove illegal migrants. Can you put a figure on the number of flights you expect to take off every month, or a number of people, please?
No, Steph, we're deliberately not, because we don't want to compromise operational security, but I've been very clear that it's not just about one flight. You do need a regular rhythm of flights because you need to build that deterrent. And what I can tell you is that the airfield is on standby. Illegal migrants have already been detained. Escorts have been trained. The flights have been booked. The caseworkers are already working through it. So all the plans are in place so that if I'm re-elected as Prime Minister, if we're in government, those flights will go to Rwanda and we can build that deterrent. And that's a choice for everyone at this election. If you want the boat stopped, there is no way to do that without having a deterrent. Ours is the only plan on the table. And as I asked Keir Starmer repeatedly the other night, what would you do with the migrants that come here illegally? There simply wasn't an answer. right? Just saying smash the gangs is not a plan. A slogan is not a plan, right? You need to have something to do with illegal migrants. We've got a plan, he doesn't, and that means the situation will just get worse. Right. And I think lastly we have, is it a local democracy reporter?
Hi, sorry,
Nadia?
I think I've sat on the wrong side.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Nadia Lincoln. I'm the local democracy reporter for Northamptonshire. In the county, we've had a massive problem with SEND children not getting enough provision and not getting the proper education, which has also been reflected nationally. In the most recent report, it found that there were systemic and widespread problems. Why have these families been let down for so long, and what would a Conservative government do to help them?
Yeah. Thanks, Nadia. And we want to make sure that children everywhere, and regardless of their backgrounds, get all the support and the opportunities they need to live fulfilling and thriving lives. When it comes to SEND in particular, we've raised the funding by about 60% overall over this Parliament. I don't have the figures off the top of my head for Northamptonshire, but what we talked about in the manifesto is to open many more SEND-free schools, which is in the manifesto and funded, because we know that provision needs to increase, and the manifesto makes specific provision for that, because as I said, this is about making sure children, no matter where they grow up in our society, have all the opportunities to be supported and to thrive, and that will always happen under a Conservative government. Good. Thank you very, very much.
12:47 is the time, so we'll take a quick breather, I think, and then when we come back, you can tell me what you made of all that. And you can do so, you can book your place on that merry-go-round by dialing 0345 6060 973. So I obviously can't do a lot if you have turned your radio off in protest. But if you did stick it out, the duration, just tell me what you thought. And I want some... I don't just ring in and say, God, that was boring. There is something odd about the energy levels. We'll discuss this shortly, but I genuinely want to know what you made of that. Stuart's been in touch. He says, please, can we have a motoring phone in, James? It is 12:51. I mean, I do think it's worth reflecting upon what the combined audience of GB News and Times Radio is at the moment, and then noting that he didn't take questions from Channel 4 News, The Guardian or LBC, which means that Natasha Clark went all the way to Silverstone for nothing. Almost. Natasha, what did you make of it all?
You win some, you lose some, James. I hope the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, when he unveils his manifesto, will give LBC a question later on this week. So fingers crossed for that. But anyway, final roll of the dice for Rishi Sunak today. This is one of the last moments that he's got to try and convince the country, try and pull the Tories out of this death spiral that they appear to have got themselves in. We've obviously got 24 days to go till everyone goes to the polls. And this Tory manifesto today, lots of it, of course, already what we did know, but there are some new bits today. And he's hoping that that will be enough to revive the Tory fortune and to pull them finally up in the polls. And the main offering today, his headline offer, is a new tax cut, the abolition of national insurance by the end of the next Parliament.
Setting up on your own means you don't have the same security that those on payroll do. So it must be worth taking that risk. We need to make it worth taking that risk. And that means that their taxes must be cut. So, in the next Parliament, we will scrap entirely the main rate of self-employed national insurance.
And the Prime Minister, I thought, quite honest with the fact that he thinks and he knows, he recognises people are very fed up with him and very fed up with the Conservative Party. But he claims that he is the only one with the ideas to help create that better future.
But I'm not blind to the fact that people are frustrated with our party and frustrated with me. Things have not always been easy, and we have not got everything right. But we are the only party in this election with the big ideas to make our country a better place to live.
And a few of those new ideas that's just been revealed in the Tory Manifesto, which has just been published, a 25-year starting prison term for those found guilty of domestic murder, the requirement for rapists and serious sexual offenders to serve all of their sentences behind bars, banning protests outside of schools, a cap on social care costs from October 2025. Previous administrations will recognise that's exactly the kind of promise that brought down Theresa May and her manifesto when she was riding high in the polls. No promise to leave the ECHR, as some Tories were fighting for, but will include a promise to reform our asylum laws. Buried in the small print in there, a ban on phones in schools to become mandatory, 2 hours of PE a week for all pupils, crack down on poor degrees, more apprenticeships. But look, James, will this change the polls? That's what everybody's going to be asking today. Is this going to be enough? Is it bold enough to really woo people back over to the Conservatives? I'm not sure it is. He didn't appear to be hugely fired up today. I think he appeared a little bit tired as well, and we are only halfway through this campaign. Labour have already said it's a Jeremy Corbyn manifesto. That is quite a claim coming from Keir Starmer, who, let's not forget, campaigned for 2 Jeremy Corbyn manifestos. They're going very hard on that attack and going very hard on the tax line today. Rishi Sunak just a few minutes ago promised that the tax burden would come down every year of this parliament. But really, are people going to believe this guy? The guy that repeatedly put up taxes, the guy that repeatedly promised to cut them and has cut them twice, obviously now in the past sort of year or so. But really, it hasn't moved the polls at all. We still have the highest burden in modern times. Labour say the Conservatives have raised taxes 21 times in the past. Parliament, can anybody really trust them after 14 years? And I think Rishi Sunak, with what he said earlier today, acknowledges that frustration, acknowledges that people want a change. But this is really his last roll of the dice to try and turn that around before we go to the polls on July 4th.
There's still 23 or 4 days, isn't there, until, I mean, we're not even at the 3-week mark. And I'm interested that you picked up on the energy levels. I think of that rally that Neil Kinnock famously conducted when he was accused of behaving as if he'd already won the election in it'd be 92, wouldn't it? And of course he didn't. And he shouted. This almost felt like the opposite of that. This was curiously stuffing free, wasn't it? It was incredibly flat for what is, as you say, not only a very important event, but possibly the last roll of the dice.
Yeah, just pumping through the music through the speakers and having a lot of activists in the room doesn't really create a buzzy atmosphere for these sort of things. And it did feel that those activists were putting it on a little bit. And even the cabinet, whooping and clapping in the front row, it all felt a bit fake. It all felt a bit like they're just putting on a show for us all to try and gee us all up into thinking that this might still be possible to win. But privately, so many Tories, so many former MPs and so many potential candidates that want to be re-elected are privately admitting that they think this election is already lost. Can this turn it around? Like I say, lots of new ideas in this manifesto, but really I think if you look at the polls, if you look at what people are saying, if you listen to our callers day in, day out, many of them feel that they just want a change, they just want someone different. Is this going to be enough to revive the Tory fortunes? It doesn't feel like it will be.
Before you go, what question would you have asked if he'd had the courtesy to invite you to ask one?
Well, I had a few up my sleeve, James. One of the ones that was nicked by a rival broadcaster was, why can we trust you to deliver all these promises when you've repeatedly, and the Conservatives have repeatedly done so? I also wanted to ask him about reform. They're, of course, just a couple of points behind in the polls at the moment. And I wanted to ask him if he really feels that this is enough to see off that threat from reform. There's a potential that we could see the Tories fall behind reform in the polls in the next few days and weeks. And if that happens, it really is endgame for them. So those would be two up my sleeve if I had had the chance. And yes, who knows, maybe later this week, the Labour leader and potentially will be feeling a little bit more lenient to LBC. We'll see.
Natasha Clark, thank you for that. And thank you for travelling all the way to Silverstone to cover the launch of the manifesto by a party leader who couldn't even pay you the basic courtesy of allowing you to ask a question, but found time for organisations who can count their audience on one hand. Extraordinary, I suppose, if you're a billionaire setting up a television station. That's what you're paying for, isn't it? Patronage from the actual Prime Minister. That's it from me for another day. We're going to do it all again tomorrow. Thank you for sparing me from having to take calls on that. Unfortunately, Sheila Fogarty isn't going to enjoy quite the same reprieve.
Well, this was my plan all along, was to do this, so it's fine. It's fine.
If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. Oh, 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 it's